Hello there, and welcome to The Tired Thinker, a quiet corner of the internet where big ideas take a slow, steady breath. Tonight's journey drifts through something mysterious, fascinating, and sometimes unsettling. Strange belief systems that have shaped the course of history. These are the beliefs that stirred empires, guided rituals, and inspired both beauty and tragedy. From secret societies meeting in candlelit rooms, to cults gathered under starlit skies, to ancient faiths that still echo in our modern world, these stories remind us how powerful ideas can be. You might not believe in these systems yourself. You might even find them odd or unbelievable, but they shaped the lives of those who followed them, and through them, the world we live in now. Before we begin, I'd love to know, where are you watching from, and what time is it right now in your corner of the world? It's a small reminder that while these stories once unfolded across different lands and centuries, here we are, scattered around the globe, quietly gathered together. If you find these slow explorations comforting, or if you just need a soft moment of thought after a long day, I'd be grateful if you gave this video a like or gently subscribed. It helps this quiet channel reach others who might need a calm space to reflect too. Now, settle in. Let's begin our slow walk through the strange beliefs that have shaped humanity's story. Cargo cults appeared in the islands of the Pacific during and after World War II. Many of these islands were isolated communities that had lived with limited outside contact. When the war began, foreign militaries built bases on these islands. Soldiers brought food, medicine, tools, and machines that the local people had never seen before. Cargo planes landed full of supplies. Ships arrived with crates of goods. These items seemed almost magical to the islanders. When the war ended, the soldiers left and the supply drops stopped. The sudden loss of cargo left a deep impression. The islanders tried to make sense of what they had seen. They did not understand global trade or military logistics. They saw planes arrive with gifts from the sky, and they connected these events to spiritual beliefs. They thought powerful beings had sent the cargo. The soldiers, with their uniforms and rituals, seemed like priests who knew the secrets to summon these gifts. When the soldiers left, the islanders wanted to bring the cargo back. To do this, they began to copy what they had seen. They cleared runways on the beaches. They built wooden control towers and carved headphones from coconut shells. They even made life-sized replicas of airplanes from bamboo. Some wore military-style uniforms. They marched and waved flags like the soldiers once did. They believed that if they recreated these actions, the planes would return. This practice gave these movements the name cargo cults. The word cargo referred to the goods the people wanted, and cult described the spiritual belief system behind their actions. One well-known example is the Jonestown Movement on the island of Tanna in Vanuatu. During the war, American soldiers arrived there with large amounts of supplies. After the war, the locals began to worship a figure called John Frum, who they believed would return with cargo. Every year on February 15th, followers dress in red and march with homemade American flags. They believe that John Frum will one day come back, bringing goods and prosperity. These beliefs were not random or foolish. They were a logical response to what the islanders saw. They had no access to the same knowledge that outsiders had about airplanes, radios, or factories. To them, it made sense that the rituals of the soldiers caused the cargo to appear. Imagine if you lived on a small island and had never seen a machine before. One day, large silver birds land from the sky, and people hand out food and tools. When the birds fly away and never return, you would try to figure out how to bring them back. Without modern science or global context, copying the behavior of the soldiers would seem like a reasonable solution. Anthropologists who studied these movements saw them as examples of how human societies create meaning. People everywhere try to explain sudden changes in their world. In the Pacific, the arrival of modern technology happened almost overnight. The islanders had to explain not just strange machines, but also the power imbalance between themselves and the outsiders. The cargo cults gave them a way to make sense of this. The structures they built were often very detailed. Some groups constructed fake radios and control rooms. Men would sit inside, speaking into wooden microphones. They believed they were sending messages to the sky, asking for cargo to return. Others built docks for ships that would never come. These acts were full of hope and purpose. They were also a way for the community to work together and maintain social bonds during hard times. The term cargo cult later became a metaphor in other areas of life. In science and technology, people use the phrase cargo cult behavior to describe actions that copy the form of something without understanding its function. For example, a company might adopt a popular business practice because they saw another company succeed with it. If they do this without understanding why it worked in the first place, they are acting like a cargo cult. They are building bamboo airplanes, so to speak, without knowing what makes real airplanes fly. Consider a software team that hears about a successful company using daily stand-up meetings. They start doing daily stand-ups too, but they do not change anything else about how they work. If they do not understand the reason behind the practice, the stand-ups may not help them. This mirrors how the islanders copied the surface behaviors of soldiers without having access to the larger system that made cargo arrive. Some cargo cult rituals continue today. In Tana, people still gather to honor John Frum each year. These events have become cultural festivals as much as religious ones. Tourists visit to watch the parades and dances. While outsiders may see these beliefs as strange, they carry deep meaning for the communities involved. They are a link to a time when the world suddenly changed for these islands. The story of cargo cults shows how humans respond to sudden contact with powerful technology. It also shows how symbols and rituals can shape behavior. The islanders built airstrips not because they were naive, but because they were trying to solve a mystery with the tools they had. They saw patterns, formed beliefs, and acted on them. In that way, their response was not so different from how people everywhere create meaning when faced with the unknown. In the 1970s, a small religious group called Heaven's Gate began to form in the United States. Its founders were Marshall Applewhite and Bonnie Nettles. They believed that Earth was about to be recycled, meaning destroyed and renewed, and that the only way to survive was to leave their human bodies and travel to a higher level of existence. They taught that a spacecraft would arrive to take them to this next level. Over time, they built a community of followers who accepted this belief and devoted their lives to preparing for this departure. Marshall Applewhite, who followers called Do, had a strong presence and a clear way of speaking that drew people to him. Bonnie Nettles, known as T, had a deep interest in spiritual ideas and the belief that humans could evolve beyond their current form. Together, they told their group that they were like messengers sent from a higher realm. They said that by following strict rules and giving up earthly attachments, members could join them on a journey to the next level of existence. This higher plane was not described as a typical heaven. Instead, it was portrayed as a physical place where advanced beings lived, like a type of kingdom in space. Members of Heaven's Gate gave up many aspects of ordinary life. They left behind families, jobs, and personal identities. Many even took on new names to mark their break from the past. The group lived a very controlled life. They dressed alike, ate simple meals, and followed rules about behavior and speech. This uniformity was meant to reduce individuality and prepare them to join the higher beings they believed were waiting for them. They also practiced strict self-control including celibacy, because they saw human desires as distractions that kept them tied to Earth. In the 1990s, their beliefs became focused on a specific event, the arrival of the Hale-Bopp comet. This comet was visible from Earth and became a major news story. Applewhite told the group that a spacecraft was traveling behind the comet, hidden from human view. According to him, this was the sign they had been waiting for. The spacecraft would pick them up and carry them to the next level. But to board it, they had to leave their physical bodies behind. He described the human body as a vehicle that they needed to abandon before they could travel to their true home. In early 1997, Applewhite became convinced that the moment of departure was near. He told his followers that they must prepare to exit their bodies so they could join the spacecraft. The group planned carefully. They rented a large house in Rancho Santa Fe, California, where they could carry out the process together. They recorded videos in which members calmly explained their beliefs and their decision. These recordings show people speaking clearly and without fear. Many smiled and said they were excited about what was to come. The group's exit involved taking a mix of drugs and alcohol to cause death, along with placing plastic bags over their heads to ensure the process was completed. They did this in stages so that those still alive could help the others. Each person dressed in similar black clothing and wore identical sneakers. When found later, they were also covered with purple cloths. This uniform appearance symbolized unity and their readiness to travel together. On March 26, 1997, authorities discovered the bodies of 39 people in the house. The news shocked the world. Many struggled to understand how a group of educated, often skilled individuals could take part in such an act. To outsiders, it seemed unthinkable, but to the members of Heaven's Gate, their actions were a logical step based on their worldview. They believed they were not dying in the usual sense. Instead, they saw it as leaving behind worn-out vehicles so they could move on to a better place. To understand why this belief was so powerful, it helps to imagine the perspective of someone inside the group. If you spent years living closely with others who shared the same ideas, following the same rules, and cutting ties with outside influences, those beliefs would feel absolute. Over time, the group's teachings would replace outside opinions. When a trusted leader like Applewhite told you that a comet was bringing salvation, you might see it as certain truth. The physical signs, like the actual appearance of the Hale-Bopp comet, added to this sense of certainty. The group also had a way of explaining away doubts. If a member questioned the plan, they were told that doubt came from forces trying to keep them tied to Earth. By framing doubt as an obstacle, the group made it harder for individuals to step back and reconsider. This kind of thinking is common in tightly controlled groups. It helps maintain unity and protect the core belief system from outside criticism. The final act of Heaven's Gate was not spontaneous. It was carefully organized and carried out with precision. Each step, from the identical clothing to the recorded messages, was symbolic. These choices reflected their desire to show that they were united and ready for the journey. In their final videos, members did not express fear. Instead, they spoke with calm certainty. This calmness surprised many who later saw the recordings. It showed how deeply committed they were to their vision of a higher existence. The public reaction to the event included both shock and curiosity. Some people saw the group as an example of the dangers of extreme belief. Others were fascinated by how a modern group could blend science fiction ideas with spiritual teachings. The image of a spacecraft hiding behind a comet captured the imagination of many. It showed how modern symbols, like space travel, could be woven into religious stories. The story of Heaven's Gate also raised questions about the role of leadership in groups like this. Applewhite had a powerful influence over his followers. He shaped how they saw the world and how they interpreted events. When he said the comet signaled their time to leave, they trusted him completely. This dynamic between leader and follower is central to understanding why the group acted as it did. For members of Heaven's Gate, their final act was not about destruction. It was, in their eyes, a transition. They believed they were going home, leaving behind a world they saw as doomed. The carefully planned nature of their actions reflected this belief. While outsiders viewed it as a tragedy, inside the group, it was seen as a necessary step toward freedom and fulfillment. A cult of Dionysus was one of the most distinctive religious groups in ancient Greece. It centered around the worship of Dionysus, the god of wine, fertility, theater, and ecstatic transformation. His followers believed that through rituals involving dance, music, and intoxication, they could step outside their ordinary selves and connect directly with the divine. This experience was not about quiet prayer or solemn sacrifice. It was about letting go of normal limits and embracing chaos, emotion, and passion as sacred forces. Dionysus himself was a complex figure in Greek mythology. He was often shown as a youthful, unpredictable god who moved between worlds. Myths described him as a wanderer who traveled across lands, teaching people how to cultivate grapes and make wine. He was both a bringer of joy and a source of danger. His gifts of wine and revelry could bring happiness, but they could also lead to madness if taken too far. This dual nature shaped the way his cult practiced their worship. To honor Dionysus was to walk a fine line between liberation and destruction. Rituals in the cult often took place in the wilderness, away from cities and the structures of daily life. Followers would gather in forests or on mountaintops under the open sky. They would drink wine, play music, and dance for hours, sometimes days. The goal was to reach a state of ecstasis, a Greek word meaning to stand outside oneself. In this state, worshippers felt they were no longer bound by their usual roles or identities. They became part of something larger and more powerful. This was seen as a direct connection to Dionysus himself, who was believed to move among his followers during these rituals. Women, known as maenads or bacchantes, often played a central role in these gatherings. Ancient stories describe them wearing fawn skins and wreaths of ivy, carrying thursoi, staffs topped with pine cones. They would run through the hills in a frenzy, shouting Dionysus's name and calling others to join them. For many women, this offered a rare break from the strict rules of Greek society. In daily life, they were expected to remain at home and silent in public matters. In the worship of Dionysus, they could shout, dance, and express themselves freely. This aspect of the cult was both empowering and frightening to outsiders, especially men in positions of power. The rituals also included acts of symbolic destruction and renewal. In some myths and accounts, the maenads were said to tear apart animals, or even, in extreme stories, people, as a sign of complete surrender to Dionysus. This act, called sparagmos, represented the breaking down of old forms so that new life could emerge. While these tales may have been exaggerated by writers who opposed the cult, they reflect the intense emotions involved. To followers, the violence was not meaningless. It was a way to embody the cycle of death and rebirth that Dionysus represented. Wine played a central role in the cult's practices. It was more than a drink. It was seen as a gift from the god himself. Drinking wine during rituals was a sacred act that symbolized receiving Dionysus into one's body. As the wine loosened inhibitions, participants felt themselves becoming closer to the divine. This was not simply about intoxication for its own sake. The drinking was guided by chants, dances, and structured activities that gave it spiritual focus. In this way, wine became a tool for transformation rather than mere indulgence. The cult was also closely connected to theater. Ancient Greek drama began as part of festivals dedicated to Dionysus. These festivals included performances of tragedies and comedies that explored themes of identity, transformation, and human limits, all central to Dionysian worship. Actors in masks took on roles that allowed audiences to experience emotions they might normally hide. Watching or performing in these plays was itself a kind of ritual, a controlled way of touching the ecstatic power that Dionysus embodied. Theaters were often built near temples to Dionysus, showing how deeply art and worship were linked. One well-known festival, the City Dionysia in Athens, drew large crowds and lasted for several days. During this time, the entire city participated in processions, sacrifices, and dramatic competitions. The plays presented there were not just entertainment. They were offerings to the god, and they carried spiritual weight. Even the audience was part of the ritual, sharing in the collective experience of laughter, sorrow, and catharsis. This connection between performance and worship helped shape Western theater for centuries to come. The cult's practices were not always accepted by the wider society. Leaders of Greek city-states often viewed Dionysian rituals with suspicion. The wild gatherings in the countryside challenged the order and control of the polis, or city. When large groups of women left their homes to worship Dionysus, it disrupted social norms. Some rulers saw this as a threat to their authority. There were periods when the cult faced bans or strict limits. Playwrights like Euripides explored this tension in works such as the Bacchae, which tells the story of a king who tries to suppress Dionysus's followers and pays a terrible price. The play shows both the danger and the power of resisting forces that cannot be contained. Despite opposition, the cult spread widely across the Greek world and beyond. Its appeal lay in its promise of direct experience with the divine. Many traditional forms of worship in Greece involved formal prayers and sacrifices led by priests. The cult of Dionysus offered something different: personal transformation through shared ritual. This gave it a unique place in ancient religion. People who felt limited or constrained by society could find freedom in the god's worship, at least for a time. Imagine a young farmer living in a small village. His life is defined by hard work and obedience to local leaders. During a festival for Dionysus, he joins others in a nighttime procession through the fields. Music fills the air. He drinks wine, dances, and wears a mask that hides his face. For a few hours, he is no longer just himself. He feels part of a larger, mysterious world where anything seems possible. When dawn comes, he returns to his normal life, but he carries the memory of that connection. This kind of experience helps explain why the cult remained so compelling for centuries. The imagery associated with Dionysus reflected the themes of his worship. Vines, grapes, and ivy symbolized growth and abundance. Animals like leopards and bulls represented the wild, untamed side of nature. Masks signified transformation and the idea that identity could shift and change. In art, Dionysus was often shown surrounded by satyrs and maenads, a chaotic retinue that mirrored the energy of his rituals. These symbols made the god's presence visible in daily life and reminded followers of the mysteries they sought to touch during their rites. The cult of Dionysus thrived because it spoke to deep human desires. It offered release from control, a way to experience unity with others, and a sense of being connected to forces beyond the ordinary world. Through wine, dance, theater, and ecstatic ritual, followers believed they could step outside themselves and meet the god face to face, if only for a fleeting moment. Gnosticism was a spiritual movement that emerged in the early centuries of the Common Era. It was not a single unified religion, but a collection of related beliefs and texts. The core idea was that the physical world was flawed, even corrupt, and that true spiritual beings were trapped within it. Gnostics believed that salvation came through secret knowledge, called Gnosis, which revealed the truth about existence and allowed the soul to escape the material world. At the center of Gnostic thought was the belief in a hidden, ultimate source of all goodness. This source was beyond the material world and completely separate from it. Gnostics described this realm as pure light or perfect spirit. It was the true home of the soul. In contrast, they saw the material world as a prison. Everything physical, bodies, objects, even the earth itself, was part of a false creation. This view was very different from many other religions of the time, which often saw the world as a meaningful creation of a benevolent God. Gnostics explained the existence of this flawed world through the figure of the demiurge. In their stories, the demiurge was a lower, ignorant deity who believed himself to be the only God. He created the physical universe out of arrogance or error. Some texts portray the demiurge as actively evil, while others show him as simply misguided. Either way, he was responsible for the suffering and confusion of human life. The demiurge was often identified with the God of the Hebrew Bible, which caused conflict with Jewish and early Christian communities. To Gnostics, the true, higher God was entirely separate and hidden, while the demiurge ruled the material realm. According to Gnostic myth, human beings contained a spark of divine light that came from the higher realm. This spark was trapped in a physical body, cut off from its origin. Most people were unaware of this inner divine nature. They lived under the illusions created by the demiurge and his helpers, called archons. The archons were spiritual rulers who maintained control over the material world and kept souls ignorant of their true state. Gnosticism taught that escaping this control required awakening through Gnosis. Gnosis was not just ordinary knowledge. It was a deep, transformative understanding that revealed the soul's true origin and destiny. Imagine a person living in a dark cave, seeing only shadows on the wall and thinking they are real. This was how Gnostics viewed the human condition. Without Gnosis, people accepted the false reality created by the demiurge. With Gnosis, they could see the light beyond the cave and realize that their true home lay elsewhere. This awakening was a personal and inner experience. It could not be gained through public rituals or blind faith. Each individual had to discover it for themselves, often with the help of a spiritual teacher or text. Gnostic communities often used myths and symbols to express these ideas. One common story described a figure called Sophia, meaning wisdom. Sophia was an emanation of the higher divine realm who fell into error and became involved with the creation of the material world. Through her actions, the demiurge came into being. Sophia's fall and eventual restoration mirrored the journey of the soul. Her story showed how divine light could become trapped and how it could be redeemed. These myths were not meant to be taken as literal history. They were ways of expressing spiritual truths that words alone could not fully capture. Practices among Gnostic groups varied. Some lived very ascetic lives, avoiding material pleasures because they saw them as distractions. They might refuse certain foods, reject marriage, or limit their contact with the outside world. Others took the opposite approach, believing that since the material world was false, actions within it were ultimately meaningless. For them, breaking social rules was a way to show that they were not bound by the demiurge's laws. This diversity sometimes caused confusion for outsiders, who struggled to define what Gnosticism really was. One area where Gnosticism stood out was its view of salvation. In many other religions, salvation came through faith, good works, or divine grace. For Gnostics, salvation came through Gnosis alone. A person did not need to be forgiven for sin, because sin itself was part of the illusion created by the demiurge. What they needed was to wake up to the truth. Once a person gained Gnosis, death was no longer a source of fear. At death, the awakened soul could rise past the archons and return to the realm of light. Without Gnosis, the soul would be reborn into another body and remain trapped in the cycle of ignorance. To explain this, imagine two travelers lost in a maze. One believes the maze is all there is and tries to find a comfortable spot within it. The other learns that the maze has an exit and receives a map showing the way out. The map represents Gnosis. It does not remove the obstacles, but it shows the path to freedom. For Gnostics, life in the material world was like being lost in the maze, and Gnosis was the guide that led the soul home. Many early Gnostic texts were hidden or destroyed because mainstream religious authorities saw them as dangerous. The rise of organized Christianity in the Roman Empire brought strong opposition to Gnostic teachings. Church leaders argued that Gnosticism threatened the unity and authority of the Church. They wrote against Gnostic ideas and worked to suppress their writings. As a result, much of what we know about Gnosticism comes from hostile sources. However, in the mid-20th century, a discovery near Nag Hammadi in Egypt revealed a library of Gnostic texts. These writings gave scholars direct insight into the beliefs and practices of Gnostic groups. These texts included works like the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Philip, and the Apocryphon of John. Some of these writings presented alternative views of Jesus and his teachings. In certain Gnostic interpretations, Jesus was not primarily a savior through his death and resurrection. Instead, he was a bringer of Gnosis. His role was to reveal hidden truths to his disciples so that they could awaken. This view clashed with the emerging Orthodox Christian belief that salvation came through faith in Jesus' sacrifice. The conflict between these interpretations played a major role in the eventual rejection of Gnosticism by the early church. Gnostic language often used metaphors of light and darkness, ignorance and knowledge, bondage and freedom. These images helped express the inner transformation that Gnosis brought. For example, a text might describe the soul as a stranger in a foreign land, longing to return home. Another might speak of tearing a veil to reveal what lies beyond. These images made the abstract ideas of Gnosticism more vivid and personal. The appeal of Gnosticism lay in its promise of direct, personal experience of the divine. It did not rely on priests or external rituals. Instead, it offered a path of inner discovery. For someone who felt alienated from the world or dissatisfied with conventional religion, this message could be deeply powerful. It explained why the world felt broken and offered a way to rise above it through secret knowledge. The ghost dance movement began among Native American tribes in the late 19th century, during a time of deep suffering and loss. The westward expansion of the United States had brought violence, disease, and forced relocation. Tribes were pushed from their ancestral lands onto reservations, where food was scarce and traditional ways of life were broken. Buffalo, which had been central to many plains cultures, were hunted almost to extinction by settlers and the U.S. government. In this desperate setting, a new spiritual message began to spread, a promise that the world could be restored if people followed a sacred ritual. The movement started with a Paiute spiritual leader named Wovaka, also known as Jack Wilson. He lived in Nevada, and in 1889, during a solar eclipse, he experienced a powerful vision. In this vision, he saw a new world where native peoples lived freely, without hunger or fear. He saw their ancestors alive again, walking the earth. He also saw that the settlers and soldiers who had brought suffering would disappear. Wovoka said this transformation would happen if people lived in peace, worked hard, and performed a special dance. This dance, which came to be known as the ghost dance, would connect the living with the spirits of the dead and help bring about the great change he had seen. Wovoka's message spread quickly across the West. Messengers carried it to many tribes, including the Lakota, Cheyenne, Arapaho, and others. Each tribe understood it through its own traditions, but the core promise was the same: a future of renewal and freedom. For many who were living under harsh reservation policies, this message offered hope. It gave them a way to take action when so much seemed beyond their control. By performing the dance, they felt they were helping to bring back the old world and restore balance. The ghost dance itself was a communal ritual. Participants formed a large circle and held hands while singing and chanting sacred songs. They moved slowly at first, then faster, creating a rhythm that carried them into a trance-like state. Some dancers collapsed from exhaustion or had visions during the ceremony. These visions were seen as signs of the spirits speaking to them. The dance could last for hours or even days, with entire villages taking part. People believed that through this dance, they were calling on the spirits of their ancestors to aid them. Among the Lakota, the ghost dance took on a particularly powerful form. The Lakota were facing starvation and violence at the time. Government agents had cut food rations, and soldiers were stationed near their reservations. Many Lakota believed that wearing special garments called ghost shirts would protect them from bullets. These shirts were decorated with symbols of the natural world, like eagles and stars. The belief in their power grew as part of the larger vision of renewal. In this vision, the earth would one day shake off the presence of settlers, and the buffalo would return in great herds. To outsiders, especially U.S. officials and settlers, the ghost dance seemed threatening. Large gatherings of native people frightened authorities who were already worried about rebellion. Even though Wovoka had preached peace and told followers not to harm others, officials interpreted the dances as preparation for war. Newspapers spread stories that exaggerated the danger, describing the ghost dancers as fanatics ready to rise up. This misunderstanding increased tension between the U.S. military and native communities. As winter approached in 1890, these tensions reached a breaking point. The U.S. government sent more troops into the Dakota Territory to monitor the Lakota. Leaders like Sitting Bull were seen as potential threats because of their influence. In December of that year, soldiers attempted to arrest Sitting Bull. A struggle broke out and he was killed. This event shocked the Lakota and pushed fear on both sides to a peak. Soon after, a group of Lakota, led by Chief Bigfoot, fled their reservation, hoping to find safety. Soldiers caught up with them near Wounded Knee Creek. On December 29, 1890, the soldiers tried to disarm the group. In the confusion, a shot was fired. It is unclear who fired first, but the result was devastating. The soldiers opened fire on men, women, and children. By the end of the day, more than 150 Lakota were dead. This massacre marked the end of the ghost dance movement as a widespread practice. For those who took part, the ghost dance was never about violence. It was a spiritual response to destruction and loss. Imagine living in a world where everything you had known, your land, your food sources, your traditions, had been taken away. Every day brought hunger and the presence of armed soldiers. In that world, the ghost dance offered a vision of hope. It told people that their ancestors were still with them and that their culture could rise again. When they danced, they felt that connection, and for a time, they were free of despair. From the perspective of the U.S. government, the ghost dance was a threat to their control. They saw the gatherings as political rather than spiritual. They feared that the movement could unite different tribes in resistance. This fear, combined with prejudice and misunderstanding, fueled the events that led to Wounded Knee. The tragedy there showed how deeply mistrust shaped the relationship between native communities and the authorities. The songs and movements of the ghost dance were passed down through oral tradition. Even after the massacre, the memory of the dance remained strong. Some native people continued to practice it quietly, while others carried its spirit into later movements for cultural and political revival. The vision of ancestors returning and the world being made whole again still held meaning. It was not only about the past, but also about survival in the present. Consider a Lakota child growing up on a reservation at that time. They would hear stories of the old days when buffalo roamed freely and their people moved with the seasons. They would also see the daily hardship of ration lines and military patrols. When the ghost dance began, it would give that child a sense that change was possible. Watching the adults dance, hearing the songs rise into the night, they might believe they were helping to bring back the world they had only heard about in stories. That sense of hope was powerful enough to spread across vast distances and unite many tribes. The ghost dance was more than just a religious ritual. It was a form of resistance, though not in the way the authorities feared. It resisted despair by offering a vision of renewal. It resisted cultural destruction by strengthening bonds among communities. Even though it ended in tragedy at Wounded Knee, the ideas behind it survived. For many Native people, the ghost dance remains a symbol of endurance and the unbroken connection between the living and their ancestors. Muggletonianism began in England during the mid-17th century, a time of civil war, political upheaval, and intense religious conflict. During this period, many new religious groups appeared, each claiming to hold the true interpretation of Scripture. Among them was a small sect founded by two men, John Reeve and Lodowick Muggleton. Their followers became known as Muggletonians. The group was unusual because it rejected the authority of established churches, denied the value of rational debate in religion, and relied instead on direct divine revelation received by its founders. John Reeve and Lodowick Muggleton were ordinary tradesmen with no formal theological training. In 1651, Reeve claimed to have received a vision in which God appointed him and Muggleton as the two witnesses described in the Book of Revelation. According to Reeve, they were chosen to deliver the final message of God to the world before the end times. This vision gave their movement its authority. The pair declared that no other priests, ministers, or religious leaders had the right to speak for God. Their message was final and complete. To follow it was to follow God's will directly, without interference from any church hierarchy. The Muggletonians believed that human reason was unreliable when it came to spiritual matters. In their view, rational arguments and scholarly debates only led to confusion and pride. Many other groups at the time engaged in fierce public disputes, publishing pamphlets and holding meetings to argue their positions. The Muggletonians rejected this approach. They saw reason as a tool of the flesh, not the spirit. Instead of interpreting Scripture through logic or tradition, they relied on the direct revelations given to Reeve and Muggleton. For them, these revelations were perfect and beyond question. One of their distinctive teachings was about the nature of God. They believed that God had a physical form and was not an invisible, abstract being. This view set them apart from most other Christians who saw God as spirit. In Muggletonian belief, God had once appeared in the person of Jesus Christ and continued to exist in a bodily form. They also rejected the idea of the Trinity, insisting that there was only one God with a single, unified nature. This teaching shocked many of their contemporaries, who saw it as heretical. The group also had a unique view of the devil and evil. Rather than seeing the devil as a separate being, they taught that evil came from within human nature itself. Each person carried both good and evil tendencies. This meant that salvation was not about battling an external enemy, but about coming to terms with one's inner condition and trusting in God's message. Because of this belief, they rejected practices like exorcisms or rituals aimed at driving out demons. For them, the real work was internal and spiritual. Muggletonians placed great importance on personal conviction, since they denied the authority of all other religious leaders. Each member was responsible for their own faith. However, this did not mean they believed everyone's opinion was equally valid. The revelations given to Reeve and Muggleton were considered absolute. Anyone who rejected these teachings was seen as opposing God. This strict boundary created a clear division between those inside the group and those outside it. Conflict with outsiders was common. Reeve and Muggleton publicly condemned many prominent figures of their time, including ministers, scientists, and political leaders. They were especially critical of those who tried to explain the world through reason or natural philosophy, which today would be called science. For example, they opposed the ideas of the astronomer Isaac Newton and others who described the universe in mechanical terms. To the Muggletonians, such explanations denied God's active role in creation. They believed that the universe was not governed by abstract laws, but by the direct will of God. The group's opposition to rationalism extended to daily life. They discouraged members from seeking higher education or becoming involved in intellectual debates. Instead, they emphasized simple living and direct faith. Their meetings were private and often held in homes rather than public buildings. In these gatherings, they read scripture, discussed the teachings of their founders, and supported one another in their beliefs. This private, inward focus made the group less visible than some of the more confrontational sects of the time. One notable practice of the Muggletonians was their belief in the power to bless and curse. Reeve and Muggleton claimed that as God's chosen witnesses, they had the authority to pronounce blessings on those who accepted their message and curses on those who rejected it. These curses were not just symbolic. The Muggletonians believed that when they cursed someone, it had real spiritual consequences, both in this life and the next. This belief gave their words great weight within the community and added to their sense of divine mission. As the movement grew, it faced persecution from authorities. England in the 17th century had laws against heresy and blasphemy. Muggleton and some of his followers were arrested and imprisoned for their teachings. Despite this, the group survived by staying small and avoiding public displays that might attract attention. They spread their message quietly through personal contacts and handwritten copies of their writings. Because they did not seek to convert large numbers of people, they remained a close-knit circle rather than a mass movement. Imagine a small group of tradesmen and their families meeting in a back room above a shop. The room is lit by candles, and the air smells of ink and paper from the day's work. As they gather, someone reads aloud from a letter written by Lodowick Muggleton himself. The words declare that their faith is true and that all other churches are false. In that moment, the group feels set apart from the world outside. They do not need approval from bishops or scholars. They believe they have direct access to God's final message. This scene captures the spirit of Muggletonian worship: humble, quiet, and fiercely independent. Over time, the group developed a strong sense of community. Members supported each other not only in spiritual matters, but also in practical ways. They helped one another in business, offered care during illness, and maintained networks of trust. This mutual support was important, especially when facing hostility from the wider society. It allowed them to endure, while other small sects faded away. Muggletonian writings were central to their identity. Lodowick Muggleton produced many letters and treatises explaining their beliefs. These texts were copied and passed down through generations. They contained instructions for living, interpretations of scripture, and accounts of visions and revelations. Because the group rejected outside authority, these writings served as their only guide. Reading and discussing them was a form of worship in itself. The Muggletonians held a clear view of history. They saw themselves as living in the final age before the end of the world. According to their understanding of prophecy, There would be no new revelations after Reeve and Muggleton. Their message was complete, and their task was to preserve it until the Last Judgment. This gave their movement a sense of urgency, but also stability. Unlike other groups that expected constant change, the Muggletonians believed they already had the full truth. Their role was to guard it faithfully. Through this belief system, the Muggletonians created a distinctive space within the religious landscape of their time. They stood apart from both mainstream churches and other radical sects, relying on a direct, personal connection to divine revelation and rejecting the noisy arguments of the world around them. Millerism was a religious movement in the United States during the early 19th century. It took its name from William Miller, a farmer and lay preacher from New York. Miller studied the Bible closely, especially the Book of Daniel and the Book of Revelation. Through his reading, he became convinced that these texts contained a precise timeline for the return of Jesus Christ. Miller was not a trained theologian, but he had a methodical mind and a strong belief that Scripture could be understood through careful study. He calculated that the end of the current age and the return of Christ would happen between March 1843 and March 1844. Later, this date was narrowed down to October 22, 1844. At first, Miller was hesitant to share his ideas. He feared being ridiculed or leading others astray. Eventually, friends and neighbors encouraged him to speak publicly. As he began to preach, his message spread quickly. Many people were eager for hope and certainty in a time of social change and religious revival. The early 19th century was a period of intense religious activity in the United States, known as the Second Great Awakening. Camp meetings and revivals drew large crowds, and new denominations were forming. In this setting, Miller's message found a ready audience. Miller's preaching focused on the idea that Christ's return was near, and that people should prepare their hearts and lives. He used simple language and relied heavily on Scripture. His followers admired his plain, direct style. They were called Millerites, and they came from many different churches and backgrounds. Miller did not seek to start a new denomination. Instead, he urged people to stay in their current churches while spreading the message of Christ's soon return. As the expected date approached, excitement grew. Millerite preachers traveled widely, speaking at meetings that sometimes drew thousands of listeners. They published newspapers and pamphlets to share their teachings. Many believers sold their possessions, left their jobs, or gave up their farms to devote themselves fully to spreading the message. Some built special ascension robes, which they believed they would wear when they rose to meet Christ in the air. These acts were expressions of faith, though they also caused concern among outsiders who saw the movement as extreme. October 22, 1844, became the focus of intense preparation. As the day drew near, Millerites gathered in homes, fields, and meeting houses. They prayed, sang hymns, and encouraged one another. Many expected that at midnight they would see Jesus descend from the sky, bringing judgment and renewal. The atmosphere was one of hope mixed with awe. People spoke of being reunited with loved ones who had died, of an end to suffering, and of entering a perfect world under Christ's reign. When the day passed without the expected event, the result was devastating. The moment became known as the Great Disappointment. Believers who had given up everything were left confused and heartbroken. Some wept openly, others sat in silence, unable to speak. Miller himself was deeply shaken. He admitted that he had been wrong in his calculations, but continued to believe that Christ's return was near. The emotional impact on his followers was profound. Imagine waiting all night in prayer, convinced that the world was about to change, only to see the sun rise on an ordinary morning. The sense of loss would have been overwhelming. After the Great Disappointment, the Millerite movement splintered. Some people abandoned the belief entirely and returned to their former churches or left organized religion altogether. Others tried to understand what had gone wrong. They studied Scripture again looking for an explanation. Out of this period of reflection came new interpretations. A key figure in this process was Hiram Edson, a Millerite farmer from New York. The day after the disappointment, Edson experienced a vision while walking through a field. He believed that instead of returning to earth, Christ had entered a new phase of work in the heavenly sanctuary, a spiritual realm described in the book of Hebrews. This idea offered a way to explain why the date had been correct in one sense, but misunderstood in another. This interpretation became central to a group that would later form the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Adventists continued to believe in the imminent return of Christ, but they emphasized spiritual preparation rather than setting a specific date. They also developed distinctive teachings about the Sabbath, which they observed on Saturday, and about health, education, and missionary work. In this way, the legacy of Millerism lived on, though in a transformed form. The story of Millerism shows how powerful expectations can shape people's actions. For example, imagine a family living in a small farming community in 1844. They hear Millerite preachers speak at a revival meeting. Moved by the message, they decide to join the movement. They sell their livestock, settle debts, and focus on prayer and study. On the night of October 22nd, they gather with neighbors in a barn lit by lanterns, singing hymns as they wait for the sky to open. When nothing happens, they face not only personal grief, but also the judgment of those around them. Neighbors who never believe the message may mock them, adding shame to their disappointment. This scenario played out across many towns and villages, creating lasting divisions between believers and skeptics. One reason the Millerite message spread so widely was its clarity. Unlike theological debates that required complex reasoning, Miller's teaching was straightforward. Christ was coming soon, and people needed to be ready. This directness appealed to ordinary farmers, laborers, and small-town residents who wanted certainty in uncertain times. The movement also tapped into broader social currents. The early 19th century was a period of rapid change, with new technologies, shifting economies, and questions about slavery and expansion. Many people felt unsettled, and the promise of a dramatic divine intervention provided comfort. Miller's rejection of traditional church authority also attracted those who were frustrated with established denominations. By focusing on the Bible alone, he offered a sense of direct access to truth. This approach fit well with the democratic spirit of the era, in which individuals valued personal judgment over institutional control. However, it also made the movement vulnerable to fragmentation when the prophecy failed. Without a strong central structure, different groups went in different directions after the disappointment. The Great Disappointment became a defining event, not only for the Millerites, but for American religious history. It showed the risks of setting exact dates for spiritual events. It also highlighted the deep desire many people have for meaning and certainty. Even though the prophecy failed, the experience of shared hope and community left a lasting mark on those who lived through it. Some carried bitterness for the rest of their lives, while others found new ways to interpret their faith. Out of this struggle came a new religious tradition that continues to this day. The Ras Tafari Movement, also known as Rastafarianism, began in Jamaica in the 1930s. It emerged during a time when many Jamaicans faced poverty, discrimination, and the lasting effects of slavery and colonial rule. The movement took its name from Ras Tafari Movement, the birth name of Haile Selassie, who became Emperor of Ethiopia in 1930. For followers, Haile Selassie was not just a political leader. They believed he was the living embodiment of God, known as Jah, and the promised figure who would lead Africans and their descendants to freedom and dignity. The roots of the movement go back to Marcus Garvey, a Jamaican political leader and activist who promoted Black pride and Pan-African unity. Garvey urged people of African descent to see themselves as a global community and to work towards self-determination. One of his most famous statements was a call to look to Africa for the crowning of a black king. When Haile Selassie was crowned Emperor of Ethiopia, many Jamaicans saw this as the fulfillment of Garvey's words. Ethiopia was one of the few African nations that had never been fully colonized, making it a powerful symbol of resistance and independence. Haile Selassie's rise to power seemed to confirm a divine plan for liberation. Early Rastafarians interpreted biblical texts through the lens of their own experiences. They identified themselves with the Israelites in the Bible, seeing their struggles in Jamaica as similar to the Israelites' captivity in Egypt. Jamaica, and by extension the colonial world, was called Babylon, a place of oppression and spiritual corruption. Ethiopia and Africa as a whole represented Zion, a promised land of freedom and connection to ancestral roots. The movement taught that one day Jah would gather his people and return them to Zion, ending their suffering. Rastafarian beliefs were expressed not just in words, but in lifestyle. Followers rejected many aspects of Western society, which they called Babylonian or Babylon. They saw these systems as tools of control that dehumanized people of African descent. This rejection extended to politics, education, and even styles of dress. Instead of conforming to colonial norms, Rastafarians developed their own symbols and practices. One of the most recognizable symbols is the wearing of dreadlocks. These locks are inspired by the Nazarites in the Bible, who are described as letting their hair grow naturally as a sign of spiritual devotion. Dreadlocks also represent strength, freedom, and a refusal to submit to Babylon's expectations. Another central element of Rastafarian practice is the spiritual use of cannabis, referred to as ganja. Rastafarians use ganja in communal gatherings called reasoning sessions, where they meditate, pray, and discuss spiritual matters. They see it as a sacred herb that opens the mind and brings them closer to Jah. This practice has often been misunderstood or criminalized by outsiders who focus only on the drug itself without recognizing its spiritual context. For Rastafarians, the ritual use of ganja is no different from other religions using wine, incense, or sacred foods in their ceremonies. Music has played a key role in spreading Rastafarian ideas. Reggae, especially through the global influence of artists like Bob Marley, carried messages of resistance, unity, and faith. Songs spoke of liberation, divine justice, and the hope of returning to Zion. When a listener hears a song like Get Up, Stand Up, they are hearing not just a call to action, but a reflection of Rastafarian theology. Through reggae, Rastafarian thought reached audiences far beyond Jamaica, bringing its message to people around the world who faced oppression or sought spiritual connection. The movement's view of Haile Selassie is central to its identity. Many Rastafarians believe he is the returned Messiah, a living manifestation of God on earth. They point to biblical passages they interpret as foretelling his rule, such as references to a king coming from the line of David and reigning in righteousness. When Haile Selassie visited Jamaica in 1966, thousands of Rastafarians gathered to greet him. For them, this was a sacred event, proof that their faith was real and visible. Selassie himself never directly claimed to be divine, but he did not openly reject the devotion of his followers. His presence and leadership continued to inspire the movement long after his death in 1975. Rastafarian dietary practices also reflect their spiritual worldview. Many followers follow an Ital diet, which emphasizes natural, unprocessed foods. This diet avoids meat, especially pork, and often excludes salt and artificial additives. The goal is to live in harmony with nature and maintain the body as a temple of the spirit. Eating Ital food is a form of resistance to Babylonian systems of production and consumption. It is also a way to cultivate health and clarity of mind. For example, a Rastafarian family might grow their own vegetables and herbs, preparing simple meals that reflect both spiritual and practical values. Pan-Africanism is another core aspect of the movement. Rastafarians see themselves as part of a global African community united by shared history and struggle. They support efforts to uplift Black people worldwide and to reclaim African heritage. This perspective extends beyond symbolic gestures. It includes calls for social justice, political reform, and cultural renewal. A Rastafarian living in Jamaica might feel a strong connection to someone in Ghana, Ethiopia, or the United States, even if they have never met. This sense of unity gives the movement both spiritual depth and practical purpose. Consider the experience of a young Jamaican man growing up in the 1940s. He lives in a rural village where opportunities are limited and racial discrimination is common. One day, he hears a preacher speak about Haile Selassie as the returned Messiah and Ethiopia as the true home of his people. The message resonates deeply. It tells him that his suffering is not meaningless, but part of a larger story of liberation. He begins to grow his hair into locks, to study scripture through a Rastafarian lens, and to join communal gatherings where ganja is used in prayer. Over time, his entire sense of identity shifts. He no longer sees himself as a powerless subject of a colonial empire. He sees himself as a child of Jah, destined for freedom and dignity. This transformation captures the power of Rastafarian belief. Rastafarian speech reflects its worldview. Followers often use words in ways that emphasize unity and positive energy. For example, they say I and I instead of you and I, highlighting the shared divine presence within all people. They might replace negative terms with affirming ones, creating a language that resists Babylon's influence. This linguistic creativity is not just symbolic. It shapes how Rastafarians think and interact with the world. When someone says overstand instead of understand, they are expressing a deeper level of comprehension, one that comes from spiritual insight rather than mere intellectual grasp. The colors most associated with Rastafarianism, red, gold, and green, also carry layered meanings. Red represents the blood of martyrs who suffered for liberation. Gold symbolizes wealth and prosperity, not just material wealth, but spiritual abundance. Green stands for the land of Africa and the natural world. These colors are often seen in clothing, flags, and artwork, serving as constant reminders of the movement's roots and goals. A simple head wrap in these colors can signal both faith and defiance against systems of oppression. The Rastafarian movement remains diverse, with different houses or branches emphasizing different teachings. Some focus heavily on the divinity of Haile Selassie, while others place more emphasis on social action or spiritual practice. Despite these differences, the core vision remains the same: a rejection of Babylon, a celebration of African identity, and a commitment to living in alignment with Jah's will. Through song, ritual, and daily life, Rastafarians continue to express a faith that is both deeply personal and profoundly connected to the struggles of their people. The Thuggee Cult was a secret network that operated across India for centuries. Its members were known as thugs, a term that comes from the Hindi word fag, meaning deceiver or trickster. They were feared for their practice of ritual murder and robbery, which they carried out in honor of the Hindu goddess Kali. Unlike ordinary bandits, the thugs believed their acts were part of a sacred duty. To them, killing was not just a crime, but a religious obligation that helped maintain the balance of the universe. The origins of the Thuggee Cult are difficult to trace. Some historians believe it began as early as the medieval period, growing in strength as trade routes expanded across the Indian subcontinent. The thugs traveled in small groups along these routes, blending in with merchants, pilgrims, or travelers. They spoke many languages and knew how to adapt their behavior to avoid suspicion. This allowed them to move freely across regions without drawing attention to themselves. Their strength lay in their secrecy and their ability to gain the trust of those they intended to kill. The thugs' method of attack was distinctive and highly organized. They rarely used weapons like swords or knives, which could leave obvious wounds and raise alarms. Instead, they relied on strangulation. Each group carried a long knotted cloth called a rumal, which they used to silently kill their victims. The knot allowed the cloth to tighten quickly around the neck. This method left little trace of violence, making it harder for authorities to connect the deaths to foul play. After the killing, the group would carefully bury the body in a hidden location before taking the victim's valuables. The entire process was precise and rehearsed, almost like a ritual dance. Before striking, the thugs spent time building trust. They often traveled alongside their targets for days, sharing meals and stories, pretending to be fellow travelers. They might even help carry luggage or offer protection from imagined dangers. This false friendship lulled the victims into a sense of safety. When the moment came, the attack was swift and coordinated. One man would distract the victim, while another slipped the cloth around their neck. The rest of the group ensured there were no witnesses. In this way, entire parties of travelers could be killed without a single cry for help being heard. The thugs believed they were serving Kali, the fierce goddess of destruction and transformation. In their view, each life they took was a sacrifice offered to her. They saw themselves as instruments of her will, chosen to remove certain people from the world to keep cosmic order in balance. This belief gave their acts a religious meaning that went beyond mere greed. Even the division of stolen goods followed ritual rules. The group shared the loot according to a strict hierarchy, with certain portions set aside as offerings to the goddess. This spiritual framework helped bind the members together and justify their actions in their own minds. Membership in the cult was often hereditary. Sons were introduced to the practices of the thugs at a young age, learning the rituals and techniques from their fathers. Initiations included oaths of loyalty and secrecy. To break these oaths was considered not only betrayal, but also sacrilege. Outsiders rarely discovered the inner workings of the group. Even within their ranks, members often knew little about the wider network. This compartmentalization made it difficult for authorities to track or disrupt their operations. A thug might travel hundreds of miles and encounter other groups without ever revealing his identity to the broader world. The scale of their activities was vast. Some estimates suggest that thousands of people may have been killed by Thuggee bands over the centuries. The victims came from many walks of life: merchants carrying goods, wealthy pilgrims traveling to holy sites, even small groups of soldiers or officials moving between towns. Because the attacks left few traces and the bodies were hidden, many disappearances went unrecorded. Villagers along major routes might whisper about cursed stretches of road or travelers who never returned, but concrete evidence was scarce. For local communities, the presence of the thugs was both terrifying and strangely distant. A merchant setting out on a journey might hire guards or join a caravan for safety, but he could never be sure who among his companions was truly trustworthy. Imagine traveling for days with a group of strangers, sharing food and conversation, only to discover too late that they intended to kill you. This uncertainty created an atmosphere of fear that stretched across entire regions. The British East India Company, which controlled much of India by the early 19th century, began to take notice of the problem. Officials were alarmed by the reports of disappearances and robberies along key trade routes. At first, they struggled to understand what they were facing. Ordinary bandits could be confronted directly, but the thugs were different. They left few witnesses and blended seamlessly into normal society. Some were farmers or artisans when not traveling. Others worked within local administrations, gathering information about potential targets. This made it almost impossible to identify them by appearance alone. In the 1830s, a British officer named William Sleeman was tasked with investigating the phenomenon. Sleeman took a systematic approach. He gathered intelligence from captured thugs, offering leniency to those who provided useful information. These informants, known as approvers, revealed the inner structure of the cult and described their rituals in detail. For the first time, authorities had a clear picture of how the thugs operated. Using this knowledge, Sleeman organized a campaign to track, capture, and dismantle the networks. The suppression of the Thuggee Cult was gradual. British forces set up checkpoints, patrolled trade routes, and encouraged local communities to report suspicious behavior. They also worked to disrupt the rituals that gave the group cohesion. By breaking apart bands and isolating leaders, they weakened the spiritual and practical bonds that held the cult together. Over time, thousands of thugs were arrested. Some were executed, while others were imprisoned for life. The testimonies collected during this period form the main historical record of the group's practices. One account describes how a band of thugs lured a wealthy traveler into their group by pretending to share his religious pilgrimage. For days they prayed and ate together. On the final night, as the man knelt in worship, one of the thugs slipped the rumal around his neck while another held his arms. The rest of the group quickly packed his belongings and disposed of his body in a shallow grave before dawn. Such stories reveal the cold precision with which the thugs carried out their mission and how easily they exploited trust and hospitality. The British portrayed their campaign against the thugs as a triumph of law and order over superstition and crime. However, some modern historians question whether the image of the cult was exaggerated for political purposes. By presenting themselves as saviors protecting travelers, the British strengthened their claim to moral authority in India. It is possible that not all groups accused of Thuggee were truly part of the organized cult. Still, the evidence of coordinated ritual killings is strong enough to confirm that the thugs were a real and dangerous force. The story of the Thuggee cult combines elements of faith, secrecy, and violence. For its members, each act of strangulation was more than a robbery. It was a sacred offering to Kali, performed according to ancient rules. For their victims and the wider society, it was a source of terror and mistrust. By the time the British campaign ended in the mid-19th century, the thugs' network had been broken, but their legacy remained in stories and warnings told along India's roads for generations. In the early 16th century, Europe was caught in a wave of religious upheaval. The Protestant Reformation was challenging the authority of the Catholic Church, and new interpretations of Christianity were spreading rapidly. Among these movements was Anabaptism, a radical branch of reformers who believed in adult baptism, rejecting the baptism of infants practiced by both Catholics and many Protestants. Anabaptists also believed in a strict separation between church and state. Many of them lived peacefully, seeking to follow Christ's teachings in simple communities. Others, however, took a more extreme path, driven by visions of the end times and a belief that they were living in the final days of history. One of the most dramatic events in Anabaptist history took place in the city of Münster, in what is now Germany. In 1534, a group of radical Anabaptists seized control of the city and declared it the New Jerusalem, a holy city where God's kingdom would soon appear on earth. Their leader was a charismatic preacher named Jan Matthys, who claimed to receive direct revelations from God. He told his followers that the apocalypse was near and that Münster would be the center of the final battle between good and evil. People from surrounding areas flocked to the city, believing they were joining a divine cause. At first, the Anabaptists took power through a mixture of preaching and political maneuvering. Many residents of Münster were already sympathetic to reformist ideas. When the city's council fell under their influence, they began to enforce their vision of a pure, godly community. They banned traditional religious practices associated with the Catholic Church, such as Mass and the veneration of saints. They also abolished private property, declaring that all goods should be held in common. In their view, a true Christian community should have no rich or poor, only equals working together for the glory of God. This policy disrupted daily life and caused tension among those who were less willing to give up their possessions. Jan Nathes and his inner circle believed that they were preparing for the return of Christ. They interpreted passages from the Bible as direct instructions for their time. They expected that the forces of evil, represented by surrounding Catholic and Protestant rulers, would attack the city. When that happened, they believed God would intervene and deliver a miraculous victory. This apocalyptic expectation gave them both courage and a sense of urgency. The city became a gathering point for radicals from across Northern Europe. Some traveled long distances to join what they saw as the final stand of the faithful. Inside Münster, life grew increasingly strict and controlled. Jan Nathes imposed new rules on behavior, clothing, and worship. Those who disagreed with his teachings were forced to leave or were punished severely. The atmosphere became tense as dissent was treated as betrayal, not just of the movement, but of God's plan itself. Families were torn apart as some members embraced the new order while others resisted. Imagine a merchant who had spent his life building a small business. Under the new system, his goods would be seized and redistributed. If he protested, he risked being branded an enemy of the faith. Such personal conflicts played out across the city as the revolution reshaped every aspect of life. One of the most controversial policies introduced by the Münster Anabaptists was the practice of polygamy. Jan Nathes and his successor, John of Leiden, argued that biblical figures like the patriarchs had multiple wives and that this was part of God's design for the new kingdom. As the siege of the city intensified, more men were killed in battle or expelled, leaving a majority of women within the walls. The leaders declared that each man should take multiple wives to ensure the continuation of the community. This rule caused shock and outrage, even among some of their own followers. Women had little choice in the matter, and resistance was met with violence. John of Leiden himself took many wives, using his position to claim divine authority over these relationships. Jan Nathes' leadership came to a sudden end when he attempted a bold attack against the forces surrounding Münster. Believing he had received a divine command, he left the safety of the city walls with a small group of followers on Easter Sunday, 1534. He expected that God would grant him victory through a miraculous display of power. Instead, he was quickly overwhelmed and killed. His death was a severe blow to the movement, but the Anabaptists did not collapse. Leadership passed to John of Leiden, a skilled organizer and fiery speaker who declared himself a new king of the New Jerusalem. He claimed to rule under God's direct guidance and adopted royal symbols, including a crown and scepter. His rule became more authoritarian as the siege dragged on. Outside the city, Catholic and Protestant forces set aside their differences to unite against what they saw as a dangerous uprising. They laid siege to Münster, cutting off supplies and waiting for starvation and disease to weaken the defenders. Inside, conditions grew desperate. Food became scarce and discipline harsh. John of Leiden continued to preach that deliverance was near, urging his followers to remain faithful. He held public ceremonies where he displayed his wealth and authority, reinforcing the idea that he was God's chosen leader. These displays were meant to inspire hope, but they also deepened divisions among those who doubted his claims. The siege lasted more than a year. During this time, the population suffered greatly. Imagine a family huddled in a small, cold house, rationing their last scraps of food, while listening to the distant sounds of enemy cannons. They are caught between fear of the attackers outside and fear of their own leaders inside. Leaving the city is impossible, and questioning the regime could mean death. In such conditions, belief and survival became intertwined, and people clung to whatever hope they could find. In June 1535, the besieging forces launched a final assault. After fierce fighting, they broke through the defenses and captured the city. The aftermath was brutal. Many of the surviving Anabaptists were executed, and the leaders were subjected to public torture and death. John of Leyden and his close associates were displayed as a warning to others. Their bodies were placed in iron cages and hung from the tower of a church, where they remained for years. This dramatic punishment was meant to deter future uprisings and to demonstrate the power of established authorities. The fall of Münster sent shockwaves throughout Europe. For many rulers and church leaders, it confirmed their fears about the dangers of radical religious movements. Even peaceful Anabaptist groups were now viewed with suspicion and often faced persecution. The events at Münster became a cautionary tale about the destructive potential of apocalyptic beliefs combined with political power. While the city had been envisioned as a new Jerusalem, it ended in bloodshed and ruin. For the people who had once believed in the vision of a holy city, the experience was deeply disorienting. Some survivors returned to their former communities, hiding their involvement to avoid punishment. Others continued to hold on to their faith in secret, convinced that despite the defeat, God's plan would one day be fulfilled. The story of Münster lived on in memory and in the writings of both supporters and enemies, shaping how future generations understood the risks and possibilities of religious revolution. The Shakers were a religious group that emerged in the 18th century and became known for their strict discipline, celibate lifestyle, and distinctive forms of worship. Their official name was the United Society of Believers in Christ's Second Appearing, but they were commonly called Shakers because of their energetic, trembling dance rituals during worship services. They believed they were preparing the world for the second coming of Christ through purity, simplicity, and communal living. The origins of the movement trace back to England, where a woman named Anne Lee began preaching a message of spiritual renewal. Anne Lee, later called Mother Anne by her followers, came from a poor working-class background and had suffered deeply in her early life. After experiencing visions, she became convinced that sexual desire was the root of much of humanity's suffering and sin. She taught that to truly follow Christ, believers must live in complete celibacy. This teaching set the Shakers apart from many other Christian groups. While other sects valued marriage and family life, the Shakers believed that preparing for God's kingdom required giving up these attachments entirely. Facing persecution in England, Anne Lee and a small group of followers traveled to the American colonies in 1774. They settled near Albany, New York, and began to spread their message. The American setting, with its frontier communities and relative religious freedom, gave the movement room to grow. After the Revolutionary War, interest in new religious ideas was high, and the Shakers attracted converts through their unique practices and powerful preaching. Anne Lee's personal charisma drew people to her. She claimed to speak directly from divine inspiration, and her followers believed she embodied the Spirit of Christ in a female form. Central to Shaker belief was the idea of communal living. Members gave up private property and lived together in organized communities. They pooled their labor and resources, working not for individual gain, but for the good of all. This approach reflected their understanding of heaven on earth, a society where selfishness and inequality were replaced by harmony and shared purpose. Each Shaker village was carefully structured. Men and women lived in separate quarters but worked side by side in daily tasks. They believed that by living this way, they could overcome the corruption of the outside world, which they referred to as the world. Shaker communities were known for their order and cleanliness. Their buildings were simple but well-built, with straight lines and functional designs. This simplicity extended to every aspect of life, including clothing. Shakers wore plain, modest garments without decoration. This was not just a matter of style, but a reflection of their spiritual values. They saw unnecessary ornament as a distraction from their focus on God. Their furniture and tools also reflected this ideal. Today, Shaker craftsmanship is admired for its elegant simplicity and durability, showing how their spiritual beliefs shaped their material culture. Worship was at the heart of Shaker life. Their services were striking to outsiders. During worship, members would sing, clap, march, and move in rhythmic patterns. At times, they would enter states of ecstatic dance, shaking and trembling as they felt the presence of the Holy Spirit. These movements symbolized the casting off of sin and the embrace of divine energy. While to outsiders, this may have seemed wild or strange, within the Shaker communities, it was highly structured. The dances were organized and practiced, expressing unity as well as spiritual passion. Imagine a hall filled with rows of men and women moving in perfect synchronization, their voices rising in song while their feet beat a steady rhythm on the wooden floor. This experience created a powerful sense of connection among participants. Celibacy was perhaps the most challenging aspect of Shaker life. Members were expected to completely abstain from sexual activity and romantic relationships. This rule was seen as essential preparation for Christ's second coming. By giving up physical desire, they believed they were living as the angels would live in heaven. This meant that the Shakers relied on converts to sustain their communities, since no children were born within the group. New members joined either as adults seeking spiritual renewal or as orphans and abandoned children who were raised within the communities. These children were free to leave when they came of age, and many did, making recruitment a constant concern for the movement. Daily life in a Shaker village was highly organized. The day began early with shared meals and morning prayers. Men and women were assigned specific tasks such as farming, cooking, weaving, or carpentry. Work was seen as a form of worship, and doing one's job well was considered a spiritual duty. Shaker farms were known for their efficiency and productivity. They were skilled at adopting new techniques and inventions, which allowed them to prosper even when surrounding farms struggled. The Shakers also produced goods for sale to the outside world. These included seeds, furniture, and simple household items. Their seed business became especially well known, with packets of carefully labeled seeds sold across the country. Through this work, they maintained economic independence while demonstrating their values of quality and honesty. Leadership within the Shaker communities was shared equally between men and women. This reflected their belief in the dual nature of God as both male and female. Each village was guided by a group of elders and eldresses who made decisions together. This balance of power was unusual in a time when most religious and social structures were dominated by men. It gave women a significant role in shaping the direction of the movement. Anne Lee's own position as founder reinforced this principle, showing that spiritual authority was not limited by gender. During the early 19th century, the Shakers reached their peak. They established settlements across the northeastern United States, the Midwest, and even as far south as Kentucky. At their height, there were thousands of members living in more than a dozen major communities. These villages were often admired by outsiders for their order and prosperity, even if their beliefs were not shared. Travelers wrote descriptions of neat rows of buildings, carefully tended fields, and the striking sight of men and women moving in perfect harmony during worship. Consider a visitor arriving at a Shaker village in the 1830s. As they walk through the gates, They see men and women working silently side by side in the fields. In the workshops, carpenters plane wood into smooth boards while weavers work at their looms. The air smells of fresh bread from the communal kitchens. At the sound of a bell, everyone stops their work and gathers in the meeting house. There, they begin to sing and move together, their voices and bodies expressing a shared devotion. To the visitor, this world might seem both strange and deeply impressive, a vision of harmony unlike anything in the outside world. Despite their successes, the Shakers faced challenges. Because they did not marry or have children, they depended on a steady flow of converts to sustain their numbers. As the United States modernized, fewer people were willing to embrace such a demanding lifestyle. Economic changes also made it harder to maintain self-sufficient communities. Gradually, the number of Shakers declined. By the late 19th century, many villages had closed, and the remaining members concentrated in a few locations. The Shakers left a lasting legacy through their music, craftsmanship, and ideas about equality and communal living. Their songs, such as Simple Gifts, captured their values of humility and devotion. Their furniture, with its clean lines and practical design, influenced American design far beyond their own communities. Their belief in gender equality and shared leadership offered a model that was ahead of its time. Through their disciplined way of life, they sought to create a glimpse of heaven on earth, preparing themselves and the world for the return of Christ. Mithraism was a mystery religion that became popular in the Roman Empire between the 1st and 4th century CE. It centered on the worship of the god Mithras, a figure associated with strength, loyalty, and salvation. The cult was especially popular among Roman soldiers, merchants, and officials who traveled across the empire. Unlike public Roman religions, Mithraism was secretive. Its rituals took place in hidden underground temples, and only those who were initiated could participate. The secrecy gave the religion a special appeal, offering members a sense of belonging and shared purpose. The origins of Mithras are complex. The name comes from an older Persian deity, Mithra, who was connected to contracts, light, and protection. However, the Roman version of Mithras developed its own unique mythology. The central story depicted Mithras as a young hero who captured and killed a sacred bull. This act, called the tauroctony, was shown in carvings and statues found in Mithraic temples. In the scene, Mithras kneels on the bull's back, pulling its head back while plunging a dagger into its neck. Around them are other animals, such as a dog, a snake, and a scorpion, each with symbolic meaning. The bull's death was seen as a cosmic event that brought life and renewal to the world. This myth was not explained in written texts, as the cult relied on oral teaching and symbolic imagery. For example, the bull's blood was believed to bring fertility and strength, while the animals around the bull represented natural forces like the seasons or the movement of stars. For followers, understanding these symbols was part of the spiritual journey. The secrecy meant that outsiders could only guess at the deeper meanings, which added to the mystery and prestige of the religion. Mithraic temples, called Mithraea, were usually built underground or in caves. This setting created a sense of entering another world, separate from the busy life of Roman cities. The temples were small and narrow, designed to hold a close group of worshippers. Along the sides were raised benches where members sat during ceremonies. At the far end was an image of Mithras slaying the bull, lit by lamps or torches. The dim light, the enclosed space, and the strong imagery gave the rituals a powerful atmosphere. Entering the Mithraeum was both a physical and spiritual act of leaving the ordinary world behind. Initiation into Mithraism involved a series of stages. There were 7 ranks, each with its own symbols and challenges. These ranks had names like Raven, Bridegroom, Soldier, Lion, and Father. As a member progressed, he underwent tests of courage and loyalty. The exact details of these tests are not fully known, but they may have included endurance trials, symbolic battles, and lessons in sacred knowledge. Moving through the ranks created a strong bond among members, much like the training and discipline of the Roman army. This structure was one reason Mithraism appealed to soldiers who were already familiar with hierarchy and loyalty to a commander. One key ritual was the shared meal. Members gathered to eat and drink together in imitation of a divine feast. Bread and wine were common elements, symbolizing unity and the blessings of Mithras. This meal strengthened the sense of brotherhood among the participants. It also reflected the central myth where Mithras and the sun god Sol dined together after the slaying of the bull. The act of eating together was not just social, it was a sacred moment that connected the group to the cosmic events represented in their mythology. Mithraism did not involve large public festivals or temples like other Roman religions. Instead, it spread through personal networks. A soldier might be initiated while stationed on the frontier and then introduce the cult to comrades in another unit. Merchants and officials carried the religion along trade routes and into cities. Archaeologists have found Mithraea from Britain to Syria, showing how widespread the cult became. Despite this wide reach, each group remained relatively small, usually no more than 30 members. This size made meetings intimate and allowed everyone to take part actively. Because the cult was limited to men, particularly soldiers and government officials, it had a strong masculine character. Its values emphasized courage, discipline, and loyalty, qualities essential to military life. Imagine a group of soldiers returning from a long campaign. In the darkness of the temple, they sit together on the benches, their armor stacked by the door. The leader begins a chant, and they respond in unison. The ritual reinforces their sense of unity, not just as a military unit, but as a spiritual brotherhood serving a divine cause. This experience gave them strength to face the dangers and hardships of their duties. The secrecy of Mithraism also protected it from interference. Roman authorities tolerated many religions as long as they did not threaten public order. Since Mithraism was practiced quietly and did not challenge the emperor's authority, it was allowed to flourish. However, its hidden nature sometimes caused suspicion. Outsiders who heard rumors of underground feasts and secret initiations might imagine dark or forbidden activities. These misunderstandings added to the mystique of the cult and may have made it more attractive to those seeking a deeper spiritual experience. The imagery of Mithraism was rich and complex. Along with the bull-slaying scene, symbols like the sun, moon, stars, and zodiac signs appeared frequently in temples. These elements suggest that the cult included ideas about the cosmos and the soul's journey through the heavens. The 7 initiation ranks may have been linked to the 7 known planets, with each stage representing a step upward towards spiritual enlightenment. In this way, Mithraism offered not just a moral code, but also a vision of the universe and humanity's place within it. Competition with other religions eventually shaped the fate of Mithraism. In the 4th century, Christianity began to gain official support within the Roman Empire. Both Mithraism and Christianity offered salvation, a close-knit community, and sacred meals. Some similarities, such as shared bread and wine, may have led to rivalry between the two groups. However, Christianity's openness to all people, including women and families, gave it a broader appeal. As emperors converted to Christianity and outlawed pagan practices, Mithraism declined. Its temples were abandoned or destroyed, and its teachings faded into obscurity. Even though Mithraism disappeared, traces of it remain in the archaeological record. Excavations have uncovered Mithraea with well-preserved carvings, altars, and inscriptions. These finds allow historians to piece together the rituals and beliefs of the cult. For example, in Rome, the Mithraeum of the Baths of Caracalla contains vivid images of the tauroctony and scenes of initiations. In the frontier regions, such as along Hadrian's Wall in Britain, smaller temples show how the cult adapted to different settings while maintaining core symbols. Imagine a Roman frontier fort on a cold winter night. Outside, the wind howls across the walls, but inside the Mithraeum, a group of men gather by torchlight. They sit shoulder to shoulder, sharing bread and wine while listening to a story of Mithrais's great deed. The leader speaks of courage, loyalty, and the eternal battle between light and darkness. For these men, far from their homes, the ritual gives meaning to their struggles. It assures them that their lives are part of a cosmic plan, and that by serving Mithras, they serve something greater than themselves. Mithraism's appeal lay in its combination of secrecy, symbolism, and fellowship. It offered a spiritual path tailored to the lives of soldiers and travelers, people who faced danger and uncertainty every day. Through shared meals, initiations, and myths, the followers of Mithras found a sense of order and purpose in a vast and often chaotic empire. Though the cult eventually vanished, its hidden temples and mysterious images continue to hint at a powerful ancient brotherhood that once stretched across the Roman world. During the French Revolution, traditional structures of society were torn apart. The monarchy fell, the old nobility lost its privileges, and the Catholic Church, long tied to royal power, came under attack. Many revolutionaries saw the church as corrupt and oppressive. They wanted to replace it with something that reflected the values of the new republic. Out of this turmoil came an attempt to create a new form of public belief, one that would unite citizens around reason, virtue, and devotion to the state. This effort became known as the Cult of the Supreme Being, and its leading figure was Maximilien Robespierre. Before the Cult of the Supreme Being took shape, another radical movement called the Cult of Reason had already emerged. The Cult of Reason rejected all traditional religion. Its supporters held festivals celebrating science, liberty, and human progress. Some even staged dramatic ceremonies inside former churches, turning them into temples of reason. These events were bold and theatrical, but they went too far for many people. By completely rejecting the idea of a higher power, they created a vacuum that left some citizens uneasy. The destruction of churches and suppression of familiar rituals made it difficult for ordinary people to adjust. While they may have resented the old church, they still wanted some form of spiritual connection. Robespierre, one of the most powerful leaders of the revolution, saw this problem clearly. He believed that a society without belief would fall into chaos. At the same time, he thought the Catholic Church could never return to its former position because it had been too closely linked with monarchy and privilege. His solution was to create a new civic religion. This religion would acknowledge a higher power, the Supreme Being, but it would not focus on complex doctrines or priestly authority. Instead, it would emphasize simple moral principles, the existence of a just deity, and the immortality of the soul. These ideas, Robespierre believed, would encourage people to act with virtue and self-sacrifice for the good of the Republic. The cult of the Supreme Being was deeply tied to Robespierre's political vision. He saw the revolution as not only a political struggle, but also a moral one. In his view, the Republic could only survive if its citizens were virtuous. Selfishness, greed, and corruption were threats as dangerous as foreign armies. By promoting belief in a higher power who rewarded virtue and punished vice, Robespierre hoped to inspire people to live rightly. He also wanted to give the revolution a unifying set of ceremonies and symbols that could replace the old Catholic festivals. On May 7, 1794, the National Convention officially established the Cult of the Supreme Being. Robespierre gave a speech outlining its principles. He declared that the French people recognize the existence of a supreme being and the immortality of the soul. He linked these ideas to liberty and equality, presenting them as natural truths that supported the goals of the revolution. Unlike the old church, this new religion would not have a clergy or a hierarchy. Its rituals would be public festivals that celebrated civic virtue rather than private rituals of worship. The most famous event connected to the cult was the Festival of the Supreme Being, held on June 8, 1794. This grand ceremony was staged in Paris and attended by thousands of citizens. Preparations were elaborate. Artists and architects built temporary structures, including a massive artificial mountain topped with a tree symbolizing renewal. The streets were decorated with flowers, banners, and symbols of liberty. Former churches were closed for the day, and all attention focused on the new celebration. It was designed to be uplifting and theatrical, showing that the revolution could provide spiritual meaning as well as political change. Robespierre himself played a central role in the festival. Wearing a blue coat and carrying flowers, he led processions through the city. At key moments, he delivered speeches about the virtues of the Republic and the role of the Supreme Being in guiding human destiny. Choirs sang revolutionary hymns, and citizens marched in orderly ranks. The festival was carefully choreographed to convey harmony and unity. For many participants, it was a powerful experience, combining the emotional energy of religious ritual with the ideals of the revolution. It was also meant to show foreign observers that France had replaced the old church with something new and inspiring. However, not everyone was impressed. Some revolutionaries viewed the festival with suspicion. They thought Robespierre was using the cult of the Supreme Being to increase his own power, positioning himself as a kind of high priest of the revolution. His prominent role in the ceremonies fueled rumors that he was trying to create a personal dictatorship. Others felt the entire idea of a state-sponsored religion was hypocritical. After years of fighting for freedom of belief, they resented being told what to believe by the government, even if the new creed was simpler and more rational than the old one. As political tensions increased, the cult of the Supreme Being became a target for Robespierre's enemies. Just weeks after the festival, events took a dramatic turn. Robespierre's opponents in the National Convention conspired against him, fearing his growing influence. On July 27, 1794, he was arrested and executed, along with several of his closest allies. His death marked the end of the radical phase of the revolution, known as the Reign of Terror. With Robespierre gone, the cult of the Supreme Being quickly lost official support. Without its main champion, it faded away, and traditional forms of worship gradually returned, though under strict government control. Imagine a small town in the French countryside during this period. The local church has been closed, its statues and crosses removed. The townspeople are told to attend a civic festival instead, where they will sing revolutionary songs and honor abstract ideals like reason and virtue. Some participate willingly, inspired by the promise of a new world. Others attend reluctantly, feeling confused and displaced. For generations, their lives had revolved around baptisms, marriages, and funerals conducted by priests. Now those rituals are replaced by processions and speeches organized by government officials. This shift shows the deep cultural upheaval caused by the revolution's attempt to remake religion. The cult of the Supreme Being was part of a broader effort to redefine the relationship between faith and politics. It tried to harness the power of religious feeling without relying on traditional religious institutions. By focusing on virtue and civic duty, it aimed to create a shared moral foundation for the Republic. The festival in Paris was a striking example of how revolutionary leaders used spectacle to inspire loyalty and unity. Even though the cult did not last, it revealed the challenges of replacing deeply rooted beliefs with a new system imposed from above. The tension between reason and faith was at the heart of the experiment. Robespierre insisted that reason alone was not enough to guide society. He argued that belief in a higher power was necessary to sustain virtue. At the same time, he rejected the old church's dogmas and hierarchy. This balancing act proved difficult to maintain. For some, the cult of the Supreme Being felt too religious, while for others, it was not religious enough. The result was a fragile compromise that could not survive the political struggles of the time. Artifacts from the period, such as medals and posters bearing the image of the all-seeing eye and other symbols, remind us of the ambition behind the movement. They show how the revolution sought to reshape not only laws and governments, but also the inner lives of its citizens. The attempt to create a new civic religion was bold, but it also revealed the limits of state power in matters of belief. Scientology began in the early 1950s when L. Ron Hubbard introduced ideas that he said could help people understand themselves and improve their lives. At the center of Scientology is the belief that every person is an immortal spiritual being called a thetan. A thetan is separate from the body and the mind. The body is seen as a temporary vessel, and the mind is a tool that helps the thetan interact with the world. Hubbard taught that many problems in life come from confusion about this spiritual identity and from negative experiences that linger in a person's memory. These negative experiences are called engrams. Engrams are stored in what Scientology calls the reactive mind. This part of the mind reacts automatically and often in harmful ways. For example, if someone was bitten by a dog as a child, they may grow up feeling fear or anger whenever they see a dog, even if the dog poses no threat. Scientology teaches that these reactions limit freedom and happiness. The process used to address engrams is called auditing. Auditing is a one-on-one session between a Scientologist and an auditor. The auditor asks questions designed to help the person recall and confront past experiences. During auditing, the person holds two metal cans connected to a device called an e-meter. The e-meter measures changes in electrical resistance in the body, which Scientology believes shows where hidden emotional pain exists. As the person talks, the auditor guides them to explore memories in detail. The goal is to find the source of a troubling reaction and fully face it. When this happens, the engram is said to lose its power. For instance, someone afraid of public speaking might uncover a childhood memory of being laughed at while reading aloud in school. By revisiting that moment and understanding it, they might feel less fear when speaking as an adult. As people progress through auditing, they work toward a state called clear. A clear is someone who no longer has active engrams in their reactive mind. Scientology describes this state as a major step toward true spiritual freedom. A clear is said to be more rational, aware, and capable of making decisions without the interference of past pain. However, reaching clear is not the end of spiritual growth. Scientology outlines a path called the bridge to total freedom. After becoming clear, a person begins to address even deeper levels of their spiritual existence through advanced auditing. These higher levels focus on the thetan itself, exploring issues beyond this lifetime. Scientology teaches that thetans have lived through countless past lives, sometimes on other planets or in distant civilizations. The memories of these past lives can influence a person in the present, much like engrams from childhood do. For example, someone might have recurring dreams of being in a battle that they cannot link to any event in their current life. Scientology would suggest that this could be a memory from a past existence. Through advanced auditing, the person might explore that memory and release the negative effects it has on them now. These upper levels are known as operating thetan levels, often abbreviated as OT levels. Each OT level introduces new ideas and practices, moving the individual closer to full spiritual awareness. Scientologists believe that as thetans regain their natural abilities, they can achieve extraordinary levels of understanding and control over their lives and surroundings. Scientology also places importance on ethics and personal responsibility. Members are encouraged to follow a moral code called The Way to Happiness, a booklet written by Hubbard. This code includes guidelines such as being honest, respecting others, and taking care of one's health. The Church believes that ethical behavior helps both individuals and communities thrive. For example, a business owner who applies these principles might treat employees fairly and avoid dishonest practices, creating a more stable and productive workplace. In this way, Scientology teaches that spiritual progress and practical actions are connected. the church organizes its teachings into courses that members can study at their own pace. These courses cover many topics, from communication skills to leadership. In a typical course room, students study materials written by Hubbard and complete exercises to apply what they learn. For instance, a course on improving communication might involve role-playing conversations to practice listening and responding clearly. This focus on real-world application reflects Scientology's belief that spiritual growth should lead to visible changes in daily life. Scientology has a structured organization. Local churches, called missions or orgs, provide auditing, training, and community activities. Larger centers, such as the Flag Service Organization in Florida, offer advanced services for those working on higher levels of the bridge. The church also operates programs that it says are designed to help society, such as drug rehabilitation and literacy efforts. These programs often use Hubbard's teachings as a foundation. For example, Narconon, a drug rehab program linked to Scientology, uses techniques based on his writings to help participants overcome addiction. Membership in Scientology involves both spiritual commitment and financial investment. Auditing sessions and courses often require payment. The costs can vary widely depending on the level of service. Some members see this as a fair exchange for the time and resources provided by the church, while others criticize it as a barrier to participation. Despite these debates, dedicated Scientologists view their progress on the bridge as a priceless journey toward ultimate freedom. For them, the financial aspect is secondary to the spiritual gains they believe they are achieving. One of the most distinctive features of Scientology is its emphasis on self-discovery through personal experience. Rather than asking members to accept beliefs on faith alone, the church encourages them to test the ideas for themselves. In auditing, a person's own realizations are considered the most important result. If a participant reports feeling relief or clarity after a session, that is seen as evidence of progress. This approach appeals to those who value direct experience over abstract theory. For example, a person skeptical about past lives might begin auditing with doubts. Over time, they may recall vivid scenes that seem to come from other times and places. Whether or not they fully believe in reincarnation, the impact of these memories can still feel real and transformative to them. Scientology has faced public attention and controversy since its founding. Supporters see it as a practical path to understanding life and solving personal problems. Critics have questioned its practices, organizational structure, and financial demands. These differing views have shaped how the church is perceived around the world. For members, however, the focus remains on their own spiritual journey. In their view, Scientology provides tools to confront the challenges of existence and unlock the potential of the Thetan. Through auditing, study, and ethical living, they believe they can move step by step toward greater awareness and freedom. The Jonestown Movement began with Jim Jones, a charismatic preacher who founded a religious group called the People's Temple in the 1950s. Jones started his ministry in Indiana, where he focused on social justice and racial integration. At a time when segregation was common, his church welcomed people of all races. This message drew many followers who believed Jones offered hope for a fairer world. He preached about equality, kindness, and a vision of a community where people worked together to care for one another. Many of his early sermons spoke about ending poverty and fighting discrimination, and his church often provided food, shelter, and support to those in need. For someone who felt rejected by society, joining the People's Temple could feel like finding a family. As the movement grew, Jones moved the church to California in the 1960s. There, his message evolved. He began mixing Christian teachings with socialist ideas, promoting the idea that the government and wealthy elites oppressed ordinary people. His sermons often warned of a coming collapse of society. Followers were told that only through unity under his leadership could they survive. This belief created a strong bond within the group. Members began giving not just their time, but also their money and property to the church. Some even cut ties with family members who were not part of the temple. Jones framed these sacrifices as proof of loyalty and a step toward building a better world. Life inside the People's Temple was strict. Jones demanded complete devotion. Members were expected to attend long meetings, sometimes lasting late into the night. Jones often used these gatherings to reinforce his control, praising loyal followers and criticizing those who questioned him. He also encouraged members to confess their mistakes publicly, which deepened their dependence on the group. Punishments for breaking rules could include humiliation, isolation, or physical discipline. These methods created an environment where questioning Jones felt dangerous. Over time, his influence grew so strong that many members saw him not just as a leader, but as a savior figure. As the group faced growing criticism from outsiders, Jones decided to create a new settlement where they could live apart from what he called a corrupt and racist society. In the mid-1970s, he purchased land in Guyana, a small country in South America. He named the settlement Jonestown. The plan was to build a self-sufficient agricultural commune where members could farm the land and live according to their ideals. Jones promoted Jonestown as a utopia, a safe haven from the outside world. Many members saw the move as an exciting opportunity to finally live out their beliefs. They sold their homes and left behind their old lives to follow Jones to Guyana. Life in Jonestown, however, was far from the paradise they imagined. The settlement was deep in the jungle, isolated from nearby towns. Supplies were scarce, and the soil was difficult to farm. Members worked long hours in the heat, often with little food or rest. Communication with the outside world was tightly controlled. Jones' paranoia increased, and he convinced his followers that enemies were plotting against them. He often spoke about a looming threat from the United States government or defectors who had left the group. This fear created a siege mentality. Armed guards patrolled the compound, and travel outside was restricted. Members began to feel trapped, both physically and emotionally. Jones relied heavily on control through fear and manipulation. He staged fake attacks to convince the group that danger was real. He also held what he called White Nights, during which he gathered everyone and rehearsed responses to possible threats. During these nights, he sometimes tested loyalty by having members drink liquid they believed was poisoned, only to later reveal it was harmless. These drills conditioned followers to obey without hesitation. Over time, Jones introduced the idea that if their community was ever threatened, they should choose revolutionary suicide rather than be captured or destroyed by enemies. He framed this act as a form of protest and ultimate loyalty to their cause. In November 1978, U.S. Congressman Leo Ryan visited Jonestown to investigate reports of abuse and people being held against their will. Ryan arrived with journalists and concerned relatives of temple members. At first, the visit seemed peaceful. Some members even performed songs and welcomed the visitors. However, during the visit, several residents slipped notes to the visitors asking for help to leave. This revealed deep cracks in the image of harmony that Jones tried to maintain. When Ryan prepared to depart with a group of defectors, tensions escalated. At the nearby airstrip, armed temple members opened fire, killing Ryan, 3 journalists, and 1 defector. This event triggered a crisis within Jonestown. Back at the compound, Jones gathered his followers and told them that outside forces would now come to destroy them. He declared that the time had come for revolutionary suicide. Large containers of flavored drink mixed with cyanide and other poisons were prepared. Jones urged parents to give the poison to their children first, saying it was an act of mercy to spare them from suffering. Witnesses reported scenes of chaos and grief as families were forced to comply. Some members resisted, but armed guards stood by to enforce Jones' orders. In the end, over 900 people died, including many children. Jones himself died from a gunshot wound, which investigators ruled as suicide. The tragedy shocked the world. The image of rows of bodies lying in the jungle became a symbol of how a vision of community and equality had turned into control and destruction. Many survivors later described how deeply they had believed in Jones and how hard it was to see the warning signs. For example, one survivor explained that at first, the long work hours and strict rules seemed like necessary sacrifices for building a better world. By the time she realized how dangerous the situation had become, leaving felt impossible because of isolation, fear, and loyalty to the group. Another survivor recounted how Jones used love and care in the early days to gain trust, only to later twist that trust into total control. The story of Jonestown shows how a leader can use a powerful vision to draw people together, especially those who feel excluded or oppressed. Many who joined the People's Temple were seeking safety, equality, and meaning. Jones gave them a sense of purpose and belonging. Through gradual steps, he increased his control until members felt they had no choice but to obey. The isolation of Jonestown made it even harder to resist or escape. The mass death in Guyana was not a sudden event, but the result of years of manipulation, fear, and belief in a shared ideal. It serves as a stark example of how a utopian dream can become a nightmare when one person holds unchecked power over others. The ghost shirt religion was part of a larger spiritual movement among Native American tribes in the late 1800s, during a time of deep suffering and upheaval. Many tribes had been forced from their ancestral lands onto reservations through broken treaties and military campaigns. Buffalo herds, which were central to their way of life, had been hunted to near extinction by settlers and the U.S. government. Hunger, disease, and poverty were common. In this environment, a Paiute prophet named Wovoka began to share visions of a future where Native people would be free from hardship. His teachings became known as the ghost dance religion. The ghost shirt belief grew out of this movement and became especially significant among the Lakota Sioux. Wovoka's vision included a message of hope and renewal. He said that if Native people lived peacefully, rejected the ways of white settlers, and performed a special circle dance, they would bring about a great transformation. In this new world, the buffalo would return, the dead would rise, and the land would be restored to its former state. This promise spoke deeply to tribes that had lost so much. For many, it felt like a path to survival and spiritual healing. The dance itself was rhythmic and repetitive, with participants moving in a circle, chanting and praying. It often went on for hours or even days. People reported falling into trances and feeling connected to ancestors or spiritual powers. As Wovoka's message spread, different tribes added their own practices and interpretations. Among the Lakota, the idea of the ghost shirt took shape. Ghost shirts were garments decorated with symbols such as birds, stars, and sacred designs. Believers thought these shirts had spiritual power. They believed that when worn during the ghost dance or in battle, the shirts could protect them from bullets. This belief did not come from Wovoka himself, but developed as the Lakota merged the ghost dance with their traditions and their urgent need for protection. The Lakota faced increasing violence from U.S. soldiers and settlers. The promise of a shirt that could stop bullets gave them hope that they could defend themselves and their families. The ghost shirt was more than just clothing. It was a physical expression of faith. Each shirt was often handmade with care and prayer. Symbols were chosen for their spiritual meaning. For example, a shirt might have images of eagles representing strength and vision. Some included circles, which symbolized the cycles of life and the unity of the people. Wearing a ghost shirt was a public declaration of belief in the movement and trust in spiritual forces. For a Lakota warrior facing armed soldiers, the shirt represented courage. It gave him a sense of invincibility at a time when traditional weapons could not match rifles and cannons. Stories about ghost shirts spread quickly. People told of battles where warriors wearing the shirts were unharmed by enemy fire. Whether these accounts were true or exaggerated, they fueled the belief that the shirts worked. In a time when conventional resistance had failed, this belief was powerful. It inspired more people to join the ghost dance and resist U.S. control. The movement grew rapidly in Lakota communities, especially during the winter of 1890. Entire villages participated in dances, sometimes with hundreds of people moving together in hope and desperation. To U.S. officials and soldiers, these gatherings looked like preparation for war. They misunderstood the spiritual nature of the movement and saw it only as a threat. The tension escalated as rumors spread. Settlers reported that the Lakota were planning an uprising. Army commanders believed the ghost dance was a signal for rebellion. The idea of bulletproof shirts added to their fear. If warriors truly believed they could not be killed, they might fight with reckless abandon. The U.S. government responded by sending more troops to the reservations. They demanded that the dances stop and that leaders who supported the movement be arrested. Among those leaders was Sitting Bull, a respected Lakota chief who had become associated with the ghost dance, even though he was not its main organizer. In December 1890, soldiers went to arrest him. During the confrontation, gunfire broke out, and Sitting Bull was killed. His death shocked the Lakota and heightened the sense of crisis. After Sitting Bull's death, many of his followers fled, seeking safety with Chief Bigfoot and his band. They headed toward the Pine Ridge Reservation, hoping to find shelter. U.S. troops pursued them. On December 29, 1890, soldiers intercepted Bigfoot's group near Wounded Knee Creek in South Dakota. The Lakota, many of them women and children, were exhausted and hungry. They camped under the watch of the soldiers. The next morning, the army began disarming the Lakota. Tension was high. A scuffle broke out when a deaf man, who did not understand the command to give up his rifle, resisted. A shot went off. Chaos followed. Soldiers opened fire with rifles and Hotchkiss guns, which were rapid-fire cannons. The Lakota, many wearing ghost shirts, tried to flee or fight back with whatever weapons they had. The massacre that followed was devastating. Over 150 Lakota were killed, including many women and children. Some estimates put the number closer to 300. Soldiers also suffered casualties, though far fewer. The ghost shirts did not stop the bullets. Witnesses described scenes of terror and confusion, with families cut down as they ran. For those who believed in the shirts, the slaughter was shattering. The promise of spiritual protection had given them hope, but on that day, it could not shield them from the overwhelming firepower of the U.S. Army. Survivors carried the trauma of Wounded Knee for the rest of their lives. To understand why the belief in ghost shirts was so strong, it is important to consider the emotional and cultural context. The Lakota and other tribes faced the near destruction of their way of life. Traditional sources of strength, such as the buffalo hunt and warrior societies, had been stripped away. The government's policies sought to erase native cultures and replace them with European American ways. Boarding schools took children from their families to teach them English and Christianity. Reservations restricted movement and limited self-sufficiency. In this setting, the ghost dance and ghost shirts offered a vision of empowerment. Even if the shirts did not physically stop bullets, they symbolized spiritual resistance and the hope that justice would come. Imagine a Lakota mother sewing a ghost shirt for her son. She carefully selects designs that reflect their family's history and their tribe's beliefs. As she works, she prays for his safety and for the return of their old way of life. When her son wears the shirt, he feels connected to his ancestors and his community. He believes that the shirt will keep him safe in battle, not just because of the material, but because of the spiritual strength it represents. This belief gives him courage. It also reflects a deeper truth. Even in the face of overwhelming force, the Lakota held onto their identity and their hope. The ghost shirt religion spread quickly because it gave people a sense of control at a time when they had very little. It told them that through faith and ceremony, they could bring about a better world. While the tragic events at Wounded Knee showed the limits of this belief, the movement itself was a response to real suffering. It was an attempt to find meaning and strength in a period of loss. The ghost shirt was not just a garment meant to stop bullets. It was a symbol of survival and a deep desire of a people to protect their way of life, even as it was being taken from them. A cult of the emperor in ancient Rome was a powerful system that combined politics, religion, and social order. It began as a way to honor leaders for their service to the state, but grew into a belief that Roman emperors possessed divine qualities. This practice helped strengthen imperial rule and unify a vast empire made up of many different peoples and cultures. Rome controlled lands stretching from Britain to Egypt, and its citizens spoke many languages and followed different traditions. Worshipping the emperor gave them a shared focus, a common ritual that connected them to Rome and its central authority. The roots of emperor worship can be traced back to earlier traditions. Before there were emperors, Romans honored great leaders and heroes after their deaths. They believed that some men, through extraordinary deeds, could become divine. Julius Caesar was one of the first Roman leaders to be officially deified. After his assassination in 44 BCE, a comet appeared in the sky, which many Romans interpreted as a sign of his soul ascending to the heavens. The Senate declared Caesar a god, and temples were built in his name. His adopted heir, Octavian, used this declaration to his advantage. Octavian, later known as Augustus, presented himself as the son of a god. This gave his rule divine legitimacy and set the stage for the emperor to become both a political leader and a religious figure. Under Augustus, emperor worship became organized and widespread. Augustus understood that direct claims of divinity, while alive, might upset Roman traditions, so he allowed himself to be worshipped more openly in the provinces while maintaining modesty in Rome itself. In places like Asia Minor, local communities built temples to honor Augustus and the goddess Roma, the personification of the Roman state. These temples became centers of civic life. Citizens would gather there to celebrate festivals, make sacrifices, and pledge loyalty to the emperor. Through these acts, they demonstrated their allegiance not just to a ruler, but to the empire as a whole. The rituals of the cult of the emperor were public and highly symbolic. People offered incense, wine, and animals in sacrifice to statues of the emperor. Priests, known as flamines, oversaw the ceremonies. Large festivals marked the emperor's birthday, victories in battle, or other important events. These celebrations often included feasts, games, and theatrical performances. Participation was a way to express loyalty and maintain one's standing in the community. For example, a wealthy merchant might sponsor a public banquet in honor of the emperor, strengthening both his reputation and his city's ties to Rome. Failure to take part, on the other hand, could be seen as defiance. For many citizens, worshiping the emperor was less about personal belief and more about civic duty. It was a way to show respect for the state and keep the peace. The empire was diverse and often unstable. By placing the emperor at the center of a shared ritual system, Rome provided a common thread for its many regions. This was especially important in areas far from the capital, where loyalty to Rome might otherwise weaken. A village in Egypt or a city in Gaul could both honor the same emperor, creating a sense of unity across great distances. The cult of the emperor also reinforced the emperor's power within Rome. Statues and images of the emperor were placed in temples, forums, and public spaces. His face appeared on coins, which circulated throughout the empire. These visual reminders made the emperor a constant presence in daily life. When people saw his image during a sacrifice or when handling money, they were reminded of his authority. This blending of religion and politics meant that questioning the emperor could be seen as both treason and impiety. It discouraged rebellion by framing loyalty to the ruler as a sacred duty. Not all Romans accepted this system without question. Some traditionalists felt uneasy about treating a living man as divine. They worried it went against old Roman values, which placed the gods above mortals. Early emperors like Augustus handled this tension carefully by presenting themselves as servants of the gods rather than gods themselves. Later emperors were not always so cautious. Caligula, for instance, demanded worship as a living deity and built temples in his own honor. His behavior shocked many Romans and contributed to his eventual assassination. This shows how emperor worship could be both a tool of power and a source of conflict when pushed too far. The cult also created problems for certain groups, most famously early Christians. Roman officials expected everyone to take part in public rituals honoring the emperor. To them, it was a simple act of loyalty, similar to paying taxes. But Christians refused because their faith forbade worship of anyone but their own God. This refusal was seen as rebellion. As a result, Christians faced persecution. Roman authorities often tried to force them to make sacrifices to the emperor's image. Those who resisted were punished, sometimes with death. These conflicts highlight how deeply the cult of the emperor was woven into Roman political and religious life. In the provinces, emperor worship often blended with local traditions. In the eastern parts of the empire, where worship of rulers had a long history, people embraced the cult readily. For example, in cities like Ephesus or Pergamon, grand temples were built to honor both the emperor and local gods. This helped Rome maintain control by linking imperial authority with familiar religious practices. In the western provinces, where ruler worship was less common, the cult spread more slowly. Local elites often led the way, using participation in the cult to show their loyalty to Rome and gain prestige in their communities. Imagine a small town in Gaul under Roman rule. The town's leaders decide to build an altar to the emperor to mark their loyalty. On the day of the dedication, citizens gather in the forum. A priest lights incense before a statue of the emperor while musicians play. The crowd cheers as a bull is sacrificed, and a feast follows. For the townspeople, this ceremony is both a religious event and a political statement. It connects their town to the vast empire and reminds them that their safety and prosperity depend on the emperor's favor. In this way, the cult was a practical tool for governance as well as a spiritual system. Over time, the rituals became more elaborate. Some emperors encouraged their own worship to secure their rule. Others used it to honor their predecessors and strengthen dynastic claims. When an emperor died, the Senate often voted to deify him officially. This meant he joined the ranks of the state gods. Temples were built and sacrifices were offered in his name. Living emperors could then portray themselves as heirs to divine rulers, linking their authority to a sacred lineage. This continuity helped stabilize the empire during times of political change. The cult of the emperor was not just about faith, it was about identity and control. It provided a way for diverse peoples to see themselves as part of a single system. It also reminded everyone that the emperor's power was not merely political, but cosmic. Whether in a bustling city like Alexandria or a remote village in Britannia, Rituals to honor the emperor created a shared experience. Through these acts, the empire projected strength and unity, binding its vast territories together under one supreme figure. Shintoism is one of the oldest spiritual traditions in Japan. It focuses on the worship of countless spirits, known as kami. These kami are not distant gods ruling from far away, but are present in the world around people. They are tied to natural forces, ancestors, and sacred places. A kami can be the spirit of a mountain, a river, a tree, or even a stone. It can also be the soul of a person who has died, especially someone who made a lasting impact on their family or community. Because kami are everywhere, Shinto does not separate the spiritual from the physical world. Instead, it teaches that all of life is connected through these unseen forces. Kami are often linked to nature because nature was central to life in ancient Japan. Farmers depended on the seasons, rainfall, and fertile soil to grow crops. Fishermen relied on the sea for food and survival. When a storm destroyed a rice field or a bountiful harvest came, people believed these events were influenced by kami. For example, a powerful storm might be seen as the work of an angry kami, while a good harvest could mean the local kami were pleased. By making offerings and showing respect, people hoped to keep balance and harmony with these spirits. A village near a river might hold rituals to honor the river's kami, asking for protection from floods and good fishing conditions. This relationship created a strong sense of respect for the environment. Shinto shrines developed as places to honor and connect with kami. A shrine can be large and elaborate or small and simple. At the entrance, there is often a torii gate, which marks the boundary between the ordinary world and the sacred space of the kami. Visitors walk through the gate, wash their hands and mouth at a purification basin, and then approach the main hall to make offerings. Offerings usually include food, coins, or sake. People clap their hands and bow to call the attention of the kami before speaking silent prayers. These acts are not about asking for miracles, but about showing gratitude and seeking harmony. A family might visit a shrine at the start of the new year to pray for health and good fortune, or a fisherman might stop before going to sea to ask for safe travel. Each shrine is usually dedicated to a specific kami. Some are linked to famous figures from history or mythology. For instance, the sun goddess Amaterasu is one of the most important kami in Shinto tradition. Her shrine at Ise is among the most sacred places in Japan. Visitors travel there to honor her as the source of light and life. Local shrines may focus on smaller regional kami, like the spirit of a nearby mountain or a legendary ancestor. Because there are so many kami, there are thousands of shrines across Japan, each reflecting the unique history and needs of its community. Kami worship is closely tied to festivals, known as matsuri. During these events, communities come together to celebrate and honor their local kami. A typical festival might involve music, dancing, and processions through the streets. Sacred objects representing the kami, called mikoshi, are carried through the town. This act is seen as bringing the blessing of the kami directly to the people. Festivals often align with the agricultural calendar. A spring festival might give thanks for planting season, while an autumn festival celebrates the harvest. These gatherings strengthen community bonds and remind everyone of their shared connection to the natural world. Ancestors also play an important role in kami worship. When someone dies, their spirit can become a kami that watches over their descendants. Families often maintain small altars in their homes to honor these ancestral spirits. Daily offerings of food or incense may be placed at these altars, along with prayers for guidance and protection. For example, a family facing a difficult decision might pray to their ancestors for wisdom. This practice reinforces the idea that the living and the dead are part of one continuous family line. It also shows how Shinto blends personal and communal forms of worship. Purification is another key part of Shinto practice. Because kami are associated with purity and harmony, people must cleanse themselves before approaching them. Ritual purification, called misogi, can take many forms. It might be as simple as washing hands and mouth before entering a shrine, or as intense as standing under a cold waterfall to purify body and spirit. These acts remove spiritual pollution, known as kegare, which can result from illness, death, or negative emotions. For example, someone who attended a funeral might visit a shrine afterward to perform purification rites before returning to everyday life. This focus on cleansing highlights the importance of balance and renewal in Shinto thought. Unlike some religions, Shinto does not have a single holy book or strict set of rules. Its teachings are passed down through rituals, festivals, and community traditions. Because of this, Shinto can coexist with other belief systems. Many Japanese people practice Shinto alongside Buddhism. They might visit a Shinto shrine for life events such as births, weddings, and New Year celebrations, while turning to Buddhist temples for funerals or teachings about the afterlife. This flexibility allows Shinto to adapt and remain part of daily life without requiring exclusive commitment. The presence of kami is felt not just in grand shrines, but also in everyday settings. A farmer might place a small stone marker in his field to honor the spirit that protects his crops. A family might keep a tiny shrine near their doorway to greet the kami each morning. Even in modern cities, you can find small shrines tucked between tall buildings, reminding people that the spiritual and physical worlds are intertwined. This constant interaction with kami reflects a worldview where humans are part of a larger, living system. Imagine a coastal village where fishing is the main livelihood. Before heading out to sea, the fishermen gather at the local shrine. They wash their hands at the purification basin, offer coins and sake to the sea kami, and bow in silence. During the annual festival, they carry a mikoshi shaped like a boat through the streets, with music and cheering from the villagers. These actions are more than tradition. They express gratitude, hope, and connection. If a storm damages their boats, they see it as a sign that the kami are upset or that balance has been lost. The villagers might then perform special rites to restore harmony and ensure safe voyages in the future. Shintoism's focus on the here and now shapes its approach to life. Instead of focusing on distant promises or strict dogma, it emphasizes living in harmony with nature, family, and community. The worship of kami is about maintaining relationships. It teaches that people are part of a living world filled with unseen forces. When they show respect to those forces, whether through a bow at a shrine or a seasonal festival, they honor their place within that world. The countless kami, each tied to specific places and roles, reflect the richness and diversity of life itself. Through these practices, Shinto provides a way for people to engage with the sacred in their everyday surroundings, finding meaning in both the ordinary and the extraordinary. The Aghori Sect is a small group within Hinduism known for its intense and unusual spiritual practices. They follow a path that challenges normal ideas of purity, cleanliness, and social rules. The word Aghori comes from Sanskrit and can be translated as fearless or beyond darkness. Aghoris believe that the divine is present in everything, even in what most people consider impure or frightening. Because of this belief, they deliberately seek out places and actions that others avoid. Their goal is to overcome attachment, fear, and disgust so they can experience complete spiritual freedom. The Aghoris are devoted to Lord Shiva, especially in his form as Bhairava, a fierce aspect of the deity. In Hindu tradition, Shiva is both a destroyer and a creator. He is connected to death, rebirth, and the cycles of the universe. By worshipping Shiva, Aghoris hope to break free from the endless cycle of birth and death known as samsara. They believe that true liberation, or moksha, comes from realizing that all things are ultimately one. To reach this understanding, They practice in ways that shock outsiders but have deep meaning to them. One of the most striking features of the Aghori way is their choice of where they meditate and live. Many Aghoris spend time in cremation grounds, the places where bodies are burned during Hindu funeral rites. For most Hindus, these areas are considered polluted and are approached only with caution. Aghoris see them as sacred because they confront the reality of death directly. Sitting among funeral pyres, they meditate on the impermanence of life and the presence of Shiva in the cycle of destruction and renewal. For an Aghori, a burning body is not just a reminder of mortality, but also a symbol of transformation. By staying close to death, Aghoris try to remove fear and attachment. In everyday life, people often hide from death or see it as something negative. The Aghori path rejects this view. For example, an Aghori might sit beside a funeral pyre through the night, chanting mantras while breathing in the smoke of burning wood and flesh. This practice is not done to shock others, but to train the mind to see beyond physical form. By facing what others fear, the Aghori believes they gain insight into the nature of existence. Another practice that sets the Aghoris apart is their use of human remains in rituals. Some Aghoris consume small amounts of human flesh taken from corpses found in cremation grounds. They do not kill anyone to obtain these remains. Instead, they use what is left behind after funeral ceremonies. This act is symbolic. In Hindu society, eating human flesh is one of the greatest taboos. By doing so, the Aghori demonstrates that they have transcended social rules and personal revulsion. It's a way to dissolve the boundaries between pure and impure. According to their belief, if everything is truly one, then no act is inherently sinful or holy. The challenge lies in the mind's perception. An example helps to understand this idea. Imagine someone who sees a skull on the ground. Most people would feel fear or disgust and quickly turn away. An Aghori would pick up the skull, clean it, and perhaps use it as a bowl for ritual offerings. By doing this, they are not glorifying death. They are showing that even this object, which others reject, holds the same divine essence as a flower or a temple statue. The act breaks down mental barriers and reminds the practitioner that the sacred is everywhere. Aghoris also cover their bodies in ash taken from cremation fires. In Hindu symbolism, ash represents the final state of all physical things. No matter how powerful or wealthy a person may be, in death, their body turns to ash. By wearing it, Aghoris keep the truth of impermanence close to them. It also connects them directly to Shiva, who is often depicted with ash on his skin. This constant reminder helps them detach from ego and material concerns. Their way of life often includes wandering and living with few possessions. A typical Aghori may carry only a staff, a water pot, and a skull bowl. They beg for food and depend on what others give them. This rejection of comfort and security is another form of spiritual discipline. It forces them to confront desire and attachment. Even when they accept food, they do not care if it is considered clean or unclean. This is part of their effort to see all things as equal. While their practices may seem extreme, they are rooted in deep philosophical ideas. In Hindu thought, the world is filled with dualities, life and death, purity and impurity, pleasure and pain. Most people live within these opposites, trying to seek the good and avoid the bad. Aghoris aim to rise above this pattern by embracing everything without judgment. If they can see no difference between a corpse and a living body, between clean water and polluted water, they believe they have reached a state of true non-attachment. Consider a scenario where a person walks through a crowded city. They are surrounded by noise, smells, and people pushing past them. Normally, this person might feel irritation or stress. An Aghori would experience the same environment without labeling it as pleasant or unpleasant. For them, the noise and chaos are just as sacred as the silence of a mountain cave. This ability to see the divine in all situations is the ultimate goal of their path. Rituals are central to Aghori practice. They often involve chanting mantras dedicated to Shiva, meditating in deep concentration, and performing offerings. These offerings may include food, flowers, or substances like alcohol and meat, which are usually avoided in mainstream Hindu worship. By including these forbidden items, the Aghori once again challenges social norms. The ritual setting provides a space where ordinary rules are suspended and deeper truths can be explored. Despite their reputation, Aghoris are not aimless or chaotic. Their path follows strict spiritual discipline under the guidance of a guru. A teacher passes down knowledge and practices to a disciple, who must prove their dedication through intense training. This relationship ensures that the practices are understood in their proper context. Without this guidance, an outsider attempting Aghori rituals might harm themselves or others. Public perception of Aghoris varies. Many people view them with fear or curiosity because of their association with death and taboo-breaking acts. Some see them as holy men with powerful spiritual abilities, while others consider them dangerous or unclean. In cities like Varanasi, where cremation grounds are common, Aghoris can sometimes be seen performing rituals by the riverside. Their presence is a reminder of the deep spiritual diversity within Hinduism. While most Hindus honor purity rules in daily life, the Aghori path takes the opposite approach to reach the same spiritual truth. They believe that by confronting what is most feared and rejected, they can move beyond illusion and find unity with Shiva. Through meditation among the ashes, consumption of what is forbidden, and rejection of social boundaries, they seek a direct experience of the divine. Their practices are dramatic expressions of an idea at the heart of their belief that nothing in existence is separate from the sacred. The Order of the Solar Temple was a secret society that mixed old legends, mystical teachings, and visions of the end of the world. It formed in the late 1980s under the leadership of two men, Joseph Dimambro and Luc Jouret. Dimambro was the main organizer and visionary. He created the rituals and symbols that gave the group its identity. Jouret was a doctor and public speaker who attracted followers with his charisma. Together, they built a community that promised spiritual enlightenment and preparation for a cosmic transformation. Many of their followers were educated, middle-class people looking for meaning in a world they felt had lost its spiritual center. The group drew heavily on the mythology of the Knights Templar, a medieval order of warrior monks who fought in the Crusades and were later destroyed by the Catholic Church. The Solar Temple claimed to be a spiritual successor to these knights. Members were told they were part of a hidden lineage that stretched back centuries. This connection gave them a sense of importance and purpose. The rituals of the group reflected this theme. Meetings often took place in rooms decorated with symbols of the sun, swords, and white robes. Candles were lit, and participants carried out elaborate ceremonies designed to evoke mystery and sacred tradition. These rituals helped bind members together and made them feel they were part of something far greater than ordinary life. Alongside the Templar imagery, the order included ideas from New Age spirituality. Dimambro taught that the Earth was heading toward a period of great upheaval. He said that materialistic society was doomed to collapse and that only a select few would be ready to move on to a higher level of existence. This higher level was described as a new world, sometimes even another planet, where members would live in harmony with cosmic forces. The group believed they had a special mission to guide humanity through this transition. Meditation, secret teachings, and strict loyalty to the leaders were presented as steps toward this goal. The structure of the order was hierarchical. New members began at lower levels, where they learned basic teachings and participated in ceremonies. As they proved their dedication, they were invited to higher degrees where more secrets were revealed. At the top of the hierarchy were Dimambro and Jouret, who claimed to have access to hidden knowledge and spiritual powers. This structure created a strong sense of progression. Members felt they were moving along a path toward enlightenment. It also kept them dependent on their leaders, who controlled access to the next stage of learning. Life inside the order often seemed normal on the surface. Members held regular jobs and lived in ordinary houses. Some even had families who were not part of the group. But beneath this appearance was a network of secrecy and control. Members were encouraged to see the outside world as corrupt and dangerous. Dimambro and Aghori portrayed themselves as protectors who could shield followers from chaos. Doubts and questions were discouraged. Those who raised concerns were told they risked spiritual failure or exclusion from the coming transformation. This pressure kept many people silent, even when they began to feel uneasy about the group's direction. As time went on, Dimambro's teachings became darker. He spoke of enemies who were trying to destroy the order. He said that evil forces were working through governments, the media, and even former members who had left the group. This sense of persecution deepened the loyalty of the remaining followers. They came to believe that only within the order could they find safety and truth. In private, Dimambro began preparing for what he called a transit. This was presented as a spiritual journey to another plane of existence. In reality, it meant a planned mass death. The first major tragedy took place in October 1994. Police in Switzerland and Canada discovered scenes of destruction that shocked the world. In Switzerland, fires consumed chalets used by the order. Inside were the bodies of members, dressed in ceremonial robes, lying in carefully arranged patterns. Many had been shot or suffocated before the fires were set. In Canada, a similar scene was found at a house used by the group. In total, more than 50 people died. Investigators determined that the deaths were not spontaneous acts, but part of a coordinated plan. Dimambro and Aghori were among the dead, leaving behind documents and tapes explaining their belief that the members had left the earth to join a higher realm. For many outsiders, the question was, why so many intelligent people had followed the leaders to such an extreme end? The answer lay partly in the gradual way the group's beliefs were introduced. A new member might first join for meditation and discussion about spiritual growth. Over time, they would be drawn deeper into the teachings about cosmic cycles and the coming transformation. As they advanced, they were surrounded by others who reinforced these ideas. The secret rituals and dramatic symbols created a powerful emotional experience. By the time talk of transit began, many members were so invested that leaving felt impossible. They saw their lives outside the group as meaningless compared to the grand mission of the order. After the 1994 deaths, many assumed the movement had ended. However, more deaths occurred in the following years. In December 1995, 16 more members died in France. In March 1997, 5 more were found dead in Quebec. These later deaths followed the same pattern: ritual arrangements, fire, and clear evidence of planning. Some survivors said that Dimambro had prepared his followers to continue the plan even after his own death. This showed how deeply the belief system had taken hold. Imagine being a member who joined in the early days. At first, you attend peaceful gatherings where people meditate and speak about creating a better world. The group feels welcoming, and you find friends who share your hopes. As months pass, you are invited to private meetings with more serious rituals. The leaders tell you that you are part of a chosen few with a special role in saving humanity. When you hear about enemies plotting against the group, you feel protective and more loyal. Eventually, you are told that the only way to complete your mission is to transit to a higher level. Surrounded by trusted friends who believe the same thing, you face enormous pressure to agree. In this way, extreme actions become possible for people who once seemed ordinary. The Order of the Solar Temple combined ancient symbols with modern fears. It used the romance of the Knights Templar to create a sense of destiny. It blended New Age ideas about cosmic harmony with apocalyptic warnings about the collapse of society. This mixture gave members a worldview that felt both grand and urgent. The secrecy of the group made it difficult for outsiders to intervene. Even when family members grew worried, they often could not reach their loved ones or understand what was happening. The result was a closed system where dangerous beliefs could grow unchecked. The deaths linked to the order shocked the public and led to intense debate about cults and religious movements. They also revealed how powerful a combination of myth, fear, and charismatic leadership can be. For the members, the rituals and teachings were not abstract ideas. They were lived experiences that shaped every decision. In the end, this belief system demanded the ultimate act of loyalty, and many were willing to give it. Zoroastrianism is one of the world's oldest known religions, beginning in ancient Persia, which is now modern-day Iran. It was founded by the prophet Zoroaster, also known as Zarathustra, who lived thousands of years ago. His teachings focused on a central idea of dualism, the belief that the universe is shaped by two opposing forces, one good and one evil. At the heart of this struggle is Ahura Mazda, the wise lord, who represents light, truth, and order. Opposed to him is Angra Mainyu, also called Ahriman, who represents darkness, lies, and chaos. Zoroastrianism teaches that every event in the world is part of this ongoing conflict, and every human choice matters in deciding which side gains strength. Ahura Mazda is the source of all that is good. He created the world, the sky, the earth, water, plants, animals, and humans. His goal is to bring harmony and justice to creation. Everything pure and life-giving is linked to him. For example, fire is a sacred symbol in Zoroastrianism because it represents light, clarity, and truth, all qualities of Ahura Mazda. Zoroastrian temples often contain an eternal flame, which is kept burning to remind worshippers of his constant presence and the need to fight against darkness. When a person stands before this flame, they are reminded to speak honestly, act kindly, and make choices that support the good. Angra Mainyu, on the other hand, is the source of evil and destruction. He seeks to spoil and corrupt Ahura Mazda's creation. His weapons are lies, violence, and decay. Disease, war, and suffering are seen as signs of his influence. Imagine a fertile field that provides food for a village. When the crops grow healthy and strong, it is a sign of harmony and the blessing of Ahura Mazda. If the field withers from drought or pests, it symbolizes the presence of Angra Mainyu, who thrives on imbalance and ruin. Zoroastrianism views life as a battlefield where every soul plays a part. By choosing to act with good thoughts, good words, and good deeds, individuals help Ahura Mazda push back against the forces of chaos. This focus on personal responsibility is central to Zoroastrian belief. Humans are not passive observers of the cosmic struggle. Each decision has weight. For example, a merchant who cheats his customers by lying about the quality of his goods strengthens Angra Mainyu. His dishonesty spreads corruption. On the other hand, a farmer who shares food with a hungry neighbor supports Ahura Mazda by bringing kindness and balance to the world. These everyday choices may seem small, but they are seen as part of a larger war between truth and falsehood. In this way, spiritual practice is woven into daily life. People are expected to be alert and aware, always mindful of which force they are serving. Zoroaster taught that this conflict would not last forever. In the distant future, Ahura Mazda will achieve final victory. The world will be cleansed of evil, and everything will be restored to a perfect state. This future event is called Frashokarati, meaning the renewal or final restoration. At that time, the dead will be resurrected and all souls will be judged. Those who have lived righteously will join Ahura Mazda in an eternal realm of light, while those who have followed Angra Mainyu will face purification through fire. This vision of an end time influenced later religions, including Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Concepts like heaven, hell, and final judgment have roots in these ancient Persian teachings. One of the striking aspects of Zoroastrianism is how it combines spiritual ideas with practical ethics. It does not separate religious belief from daily responsibilities. Caring for the earth is seen as a sacred duty because the natural world is part of Ahura Mazda's creation. Polluting a river, cutting down a forest needlessly, or wasting resources are not just bad habits. They are acts that aid Angra Mainyu. For instance, in traditional Zoroastrian burial practices, bodies are placed in structures called towers of silence, rather than being buried or burned. This is done to avoid polluting the earth or fire, both of which are considered holy elements. Even after death, a person's actions must respect the balance of the world. Rituals in Zoroastrianism often center on maintaining purity and reinforcing the connection to Ahura Mazda. Fire temples are places of worship where prayers are offered in the presence of sacred flames. Priests tend these fires carefully, adding clean wood and reciting verses from the Avesta, the holy texts of the religion. Ordinary believers participate by offering prayers and by keeping their own lives aligned with the principles of good thoughts, good words, and good deeds. A typical prayer might thank Ahura Mazda for the gift of life and ask for strength to resist temptation. These simple acts are seen as weapons in the larger spiritual battle. The symbolism of light and darkness plays an important role. Consider a village gathering at dawn. As the sun rises, its light pushes back the shadows of night. This moment reflects the cosmic struggle. Just as the sun brings warmth and clarity, Ahura Mazda brings truth and harmony. Darkness is not just the absence of light, but an active force that tries to spread ignorance and fear. A person who tells a lie is like someone who blocks the sunlight, casting a shadow over those around them. By speaking truthfully, they let the light shine and weaken the influence of Angra Mainyu. The dualism of Zoroastrianism also appears in human nature. Each person carries within them the capacity for both good and evil. The mind becomes a battlefield where choices are made. Imagine a soldier who sees a wounded enemy on the ground. One voice inside him urges compassion, telling him to offer water and care. Another voice urges cruelty, telling him to leave the enemy to die. The soldier's decision reflects the larger cosmic battle. When he chooses compassion, he aligns himself with Ahura Mazda. When he chooses cruelty, he serves Angra Mainyu. This inner struggle is constant, and it requires vigilance. Zoroastrian teachings encourage people to reflect each day on their actions, asking whether they helped light or darkness grow stronger. Over time, the influence of Zoroastrianism spread far beyond Persia. When the Persian Empire expanded, its ideas reached Greece, India, and other regions. Elements of Zoroastrian thought blended with local traditions. Scholars see its mark on later religions. The concept of Satan as an adversary resembles Angra Mainyu. The idea of a final judgment and resurrection echoes the teaching of Frashokarity. Even the division between heaven and hell reflects Zoroastrian ideas about reward and punishment. These connections show how powerful the vision of a cosmic struggle between good and evil has been throughout history. In ancient Persia, rulers used Zoroastrian beliefs to strengthen their authority. Kings were seen as chosen by Ahura Mazda to protect order and justice. Public ceremonies often included offerings to the wise lord, linking the stability of the empire to the spiritual battle. A king who ruled fairly was seen as advancing Ahura Mazda's cause, while rebellion or corruption was framed as the work of Angra Mainyu. This religious framework helped unify the empire's diverse peoples under a shared moral vision. Even in modern times, Zoroastrian communities continue to practice their faith. Though their numbers are small, they maintain traditions that date back thousands of years. The eternal flame still burns in temples, and prayers are still spoken to honor Ahura Mazda. These practices remind followers that every moment is part of a larger story. The struggle between good and evil is not only a distant myth, but also a reality lived through the choices each person makes. By striving for truth, kindness, and balance, they play their part in the ancient fight to bring light to the world.